The executive secretary will take the role, but I would like to have the commissioners identify themselves for the people here, starting with Mr. Shy.
I'm Fred Shy.
Arla Sturgeluski.
And Bill?
Well, I'm Bill Sheffield. Jim Parsons.
I'm Frank Reed.
Joe Josephson.
Sherry Holmes.
And Ricky Almeida, our recording secretary, and Rick Garnett, our attorney, and Evie Wallers is our executive secretary. And, I understand that perhaps Mr. Bennett would like to make a presentation, and perhaps I would like to get on his way. So if you have something to present, appreciate it. Starting.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, maybe you want I've been trying to get her involved in community credit for a long time. My name is Gene Bennett. I live at 3740 Winterset Drive. By occupation, I'm the city fire chief. The reason I mentioned my title, I was asked by people who I was coming here whether I was coming as a private citizen or as a fire chief. And frankly, this kind of floors me because by law, I'm fire chief 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, anytime I'm in Anchorage. And I don't see how I can distinguish the two. Besides the area of input that I have to give here tonight, you can see, because of my knowledge, necessarily has to be in regard to fire protection, which I consider very important. I've been in Anchorage since 1951. I've lived in Rabbit Creek, Spenard, Lake Otis Park, which is in the Geneva Woods area. I've lived in City View. I've lived at Martin Arms down there by Merrill Field. And I've seen this area that is from a domestic point of view from just about every angle. I went to work for the city of Anchorage in 1951 as a volunteer firefighter, and have since gone straight through the ranks from grunt firefighter right on up through administration. I think in reflecting over the people I know in the area that are in fire and rescue work, I probably have the longest tenure and have had the opportunity to gain the longest knowledge, certainly historically, of fire and rescue in the area. In the past, my philosophy has been that I advocated orderly annexation of areas surrounding the city as the need became apparent for full services. I still feel that this would have been the best orderly approach, but because of the many influences that we have here, the many contradictory desires of people and what they felt they wanted in local government, of course things have taken a little different route. As a matter of fact, Arliss and I have debated this over the years of my fit. I still feel, as I say, that annexation would have been best. But now we're up against a crush, as I see it. The area has become filled with people. The area has become filled up. All it takes is to just look at an aerial photograph of the greater Anchorage area, and you see how all the road networks have already built out and constructions have started throughout the area. So what I'm getting at is that out of necessity for the times, I do now support unification in lieu of annexation, and I do consider it the second best, but a necessity at this time. It is necessary, I feel, as a citizen and a taxpayer, and as one who is attempting to provide some of the necessary services in the area, we must stop the duplication. We must stop the struggle. I've seen some abhorrent duplication take place in this area, and very unnecessary. I advocate the council manager form of government with a full-time mayor. You recognize this, of course, as the type of government that now exists within the city of Anchorage. I advocate it because I've worked under it and worked with it for years. And I would not advocate it here unless I felt it was successful and unless I felt it was working. Speaking from my point of view as a department head who is very responsible by law for service to the public, I feel this is a very practical way to administer my particular service. On the subject of an ombudsman, I attended your meeting last night down at Leasac Library, and I noticed that the ombudsman was kicked around quite a bit. I do not advocate an ombudsman, and I'm finding it more and more difficult as I listen to the different testimony to understand why it's even desired. In my experience, the mayor, the council, the manager, department heads such as myself, all serve this very function right now. People call me up. They aren't afraid to ask, hey, what's going on here? Or I got a little problem with the fire marshal's office. And fine, we bring him in, we find out what the root of the problem is, we get it resolved. Actually, the number of calls I get are very minimal. I doubt if they hit more than one every 30 days or so, where there's a real problem. And I'd like to think that this reflects the efficiency of the department. But it is a very low rate of call. And certainly, when I kind of project that out to the overall structure, I can't see where it really is justified an ombudsman operation. It would seem to me that the mayor fills this particular function, and you want to point to a particular individual, especially under the council manager form of government with a full-time mayor. This very definitely is one of the functions that he fulfills, and I've seen this function fulfilled in the city of Anchorage, and I have from time to time seen it function in the borough too, although I'm not intimately familiar with it. At any rate, I really fail to see the need for an ombudsman. Now, I heard it testified last night also that the borough government was held up as an ideal because it has checks and balances that are more constructive and more responsive. And yet, there was no testimony given as to just in what way is it more constructive and more responsive. I really cannot agree with that. It appears to me, at least this is the feeling I get for it, that the push for an ombudsman seems to be from those areas outside the city. And frankly, this raises a doubt in my mind just how effective, constructive, or responsive is that government if the cry for an ombudsman is coming from that area. Now, I may be wrong. Of course, you people are in touch with all these different testimonies and you can evaluate that, but that's the way I see it. I support a district plan comprised of 4 districts. In looking this over, I really can't see a need for more than 4 districts. And I would think that 2 elected from each district would comprise just an ideal size operating body. With the mayor, that would make for a total of 9. I don't really feel that you would gain any more input or community contact if you had any more. The reason I don't feel that smaller districts would be better is simply that you're not so likely to have an effective representative available from a small neighborhood. You may not even be able to find one who desires to run. I've seen almost this bad situation a couple of areas over on the east end of town. I feel that I hear that the desire of this body is to try to draw out the most simplified charter possible, to make it streamlined, easily readable, and so forth. I think this is a little bit idealistic. I think really what's needed here is good positive leadership. If it's necessary to put things in the charter, put them in the charter. Because even if it makes it a little bit more cumbersome, for gosh sake, don't leave out anything that is important to the local government. It was mentioned last night also that current services in each district should be assured. I would like to elaborate a little bit on that, or emphasize that you should be looking not only at current services, but the current level of services that are now existing in individual districts. I'm addressing that remark from the point of view of fire protection. Fire protection, more than anything else, is measurable as a level of service. Simply through the grading made by the underwriters of different areas. Fire protection as a service is actually certifiable, you might say, as to what level exists. Now, we have different levels of service. For example, south of the city limits line is a class 5 when the underwriters grade did. Inside the city of Anchorage is a class 3, a distinction of 2 grades, which can mean a possible economic harm against the one with the better grading. All of a sudden they're lumped together, causing a reduction or lessening of the level of service in the eyes of the underwriter. And of course, the end result is that it affects the fire insurance premiums that are levied against the people involved. Now, I notice in this last chart, I believe this was the last one drawn up, that it has provisions in there creating an assembly, a mayor, attorney, administrator, boards and commissions, unified administration, planning commission, planning department, school boards, municipal utilities, human relations committee, and ombudsman. But nowhere does it in any way make reference to public safety, and of course that's between fire protection. The fire protection apparently is relegated to somewhere in the term public services. Now, I realize this is an oversimplification, and I'll clear it up a little better as I get on down the line. If the charter is drawn around a strong mayor form of government, then as a second best, I would have to advocate that the charter require also the formation of a fire commission of at least 3 persons. I would recommend that the members of the fire commission, on given terms of 2, 3, and 4 years to provide a rotation, an overlap between terms of mayor. These people would be appointed by the mayor, but by the length of tenure of each of the members, at no time would all the appointees be appointed by the mayor in power. I advocate also that we lean away, and I realize now we're getting a little bit below the level that you intend to line out in this chart. But I feel that a public safety director is not necessarily a desirable thing to have in the control fire function. In effect, it establishes a super chief over the fire chief, and it's not necessarily a constructive thing. It can be a detrimental thing. The fire chief is a very responsible individual, more responsible than just about any other department head other than possibly the police chief, simply because by state law there are great responsibilities placed on him, as well as out by the local ordinances. And I feel that the fire chief should be provided the best possible enablement to carry out his responsibilities. Now, as to this recommendation that I make on the fire commission, now keep in mind that I only advocate that if you should deem it desirable to draw off the strong mayor form of government. I today called a good friend of mine in San Francisco, Fire Chief Keith Calvin, and discussed this matter with him. San Francisco has a strong mayor form of government. They have a fire commission there, and I asked his views on it. If he were able to influence the formation of a new government, would he advocate this type of an operation? And he said to me, quote, he said, well, I think your arrangement there with working under the city manager would be the best. But he said, as a second best, yes, he would think that the fire commission would be a good way to go. There, apparently, they pay their commissioners $100 a month, and they act as a review board for whatever budgetary moves or disciplinary actions, any grave matters concerning the fire department. The fire chief presents to the board, and they make a recommendation to the mayor on it. They meet weekly. The only problem he could see that he and his friends down below have discussed that could happen is that there is a possibility of a runaway commission with radical elements got involved in it. But he has never seen in all these years, about 40 probably in the fire business, he's never seen more than one member of the commission that created a problem for the community or for the fire chief. Of course, this type of thing could happen in any spectrum. Section 1402 of this old charter it provides for interim government, and frankly, I'm very wary of the transitional provisions, which in effect would place the city fire chief under the borough public safety director during the transitional period, because all become employees of the new government, and of course they would become employees at the position in which they held. Now I realize this is open to interpretation, and I'm suggesting here that in the worst of circumstances, as I see it, this could happen. As I said before, I do not advocate the public safety director concept. In summary, it was my feeling that the best management of fire protection would be through a council manager form of government, with the fire chief directly under the manager. Or if this body sees fit to go for the strong mayor form of government, I recommend that the fire chief be placed under the authority of the fire commission appointed by the mayor.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Sturgis?
Gene, we've talked about this in other matters, the question of fire ratings. I wonder if you could comment, if we were to go area-wide with fire, would it be possible to offer differing levels of service depending on the area? And is there any way in advance you could get really some basic information from the fire underwriters as to what impact you would have if one system operated two levels of service?
No, it's not possible to get positive.
I didn't think so. Yeah.
And I would be very wary if anyone came before you and said, well, it will be this way or it will be that way. It does not work that way. I spent a week with the underwriters in San Francisco this last fall to discuss the standings of the city of Anchorage, and I got very few straight answers.
But it would be possible, would it not, to, although you had an area-wide and a commingling of equipment, to provide differing levels of service, say on either a planning district or a service district area?
Well, you can provide different levels of service, but you have no assurance that they'll be graded at those levels.
Yeah, right. I realize that your grading may be different. Because you have some very different problems. You don't have the water distribution system and
Transition
so on.
would be a very, very delicate thing. It would take good management and some right ways.
Are there other questions? Dick Fisher?
Chief Bennett, could I don't think I understood your concern about the transition. Could you go through that again, please?
Well, like I say, maybe I'm fear-mongering on this particular one, but as I read the transitional section there, that provision would in effect create a situation where the city fire chief would be under the public safety director. Now, I realize that the end goal, of course, would probably be to consolidate in some way the whole event. But, and my concern really narrows down to the fact that whenever something is done temporarily, sometimes it has a nasty way of lasting forever. But I am concerned simply because I'm opposed to the concept. And I wouldn't want in any way to see it happen.
You're saying the 71 charter said that
Not really.
the new, I don't think it made mention of where the fire department would be.
It's 20, Gene. Really, this brings them down. It's a position of fire chief.
Upon certification, all non-elected officers and employees of each form of government shall become officers and employees of the municipality. They'll all
Right.
become one organization.
That's correct. What is your fear in that?
Well, in that it would, at least on an interim basis, allow the public safety director concept to prevail in the transition. I don't advocate the public safety director concept.
Well, okay, right now, let's get clear right now what concept is involved in the two, in the borough and the city. And what is it? In the city, there's two separate.
In the city, the fire chief was directly answerable to the city manager,
And so is the police
as
chief.
is the police
In the
manager.
borough, there's a safety.
There's a public safety director who is over the fire chief. And he's also over emergency medical services, animal control, something to do with taxes
Building department, I believe,
and
isn't it?
building department.
Well, in the combined government, as I understand it, all three would continue to exist.
Well, we don't know. This is not known. But I would think that.
No, I'm
it's
saying
possible to interpret that.
that's what would happen. All three would continue to exist until the new mayor took administrative action, or the assembly, rather, took action to combine those departments in one way or another. So that is factually what would happen.
That is the point that I'm concerned about. We've
Okay.
reached that point.
You're concerned with the present system that the borough has now, and that's uncomfortable to you,
Yes.
and the possibility that that system may survive as opposed to the city system.
Well, not necessarily. Well, the city system, yes, because when we talk about council manager form of government, that has to do with the city.
Right.
Don't misunderstand. I'm not advocating because of the city system. I'm advocating because of the concept of the city system. This is what I'm saying.
Okay, what would you suggest that we do about those transitional measures to assure that it doesn't become under
I don't really
public
have an
safety?
answer.
Okay.
I was only thinking in terms of expressing concern.
Yeah, if you do think of an answer, I would very much appreciate if you contact us and let us know. Because, we are concerned with this transitional problem, and we're addressing this.
Are there other questions of Chief Bennett?
Chief Bennett, you mentioned if we did go strong mayor, that you would prefer the fire commission. Could you explore that a little bit more as to the need for a fire commission under a strong mayor?
Yes, I'm apprehensive about that because, for one thing, the mayor under that form of government would be concerned with many, many things. And to have the fire chief directly answerable to him, I think would make it difficult for one thing for the fire chief to get his programs through, or even maybe make himself understood because of the press of the bid. Of course, under the most adverse situation where you might have a mayor who is very politically inclined to the point of ignoring the real good of the community, it could become a political. It could be undue political.
Mr. Josephson?
I'm not sure I understand that. You report directly to the manager now, who also is a busy person with a lot on his mind, I think. Have you had experience with the strong mayor system in your own career?
No, I haven't personally had this.
So really what you're saying is that your experience with the council manager form has been a successful one as far as fire protection is
That is
concerned.
correct. I might say, Joe, that I think the reason it is so successful is that the manager is is a professional person in public management and a very capable person. And, I think this in itself is a great difference.
Are there other questions of Chief Bennett?
Yes, Chief
All
Bennett,
right, Crony?
are you aware that in the present borough government that we also have a professional manager? It's not by that name, the staff president, is what we call it.
I'm aware of that.
Are you apprehensive about there being two between, or three between you might say, and the legislative body rather than just one? Is that a problem?
Yes, I think the term that has been used here that I heard used last night was it's another level of government. It's just another step.
I don't quite understand why you think that the fire commission added on in between there would make it any less steps or any less
In effect, the
problematical.
fire commission would at least lend a year that the city manager does now. And it would lend one thing more, I think, that would be of great value to the people of this area. And that is that it would provide an opportunity in the form of these three commissions for people to provide input and be a part of their government. These commissioners would be citizens who are by appointment responsible for fire protection in very much the same manner and thinking very much on the same level as the fire chief. I think it would be very supportive to the chief and it would be a wonderful input by the community.
Then why don't you advocate it whichever type of government it is? I don't quite understand.
Well, because of the highly professional offering that the city manager has, he also is thinking on the same level that I'm talking about. Either way, I think you achieve very much the same types of goals.
Mr. Sheffield?
Chief Bennett, we were talking earlier about the district plans, and you would favor 4 districts, possibly 2 elected from each district. And then did you mean that the mayor would be elected at large?
Yes.
Mrs. Holmes?
Just to follow up on that, would you envision a 2-year term then, or would you envision a 3-year term? 4. Or 4? Or 1?
I would think 3.
So that you would, 2 out of the 3 years, you would elect someone from your district, and then there would be 1 year maybe.
Oh, I see we've got a mathematical problem.
Well,
Not necessarily.
That's not necessarily a problem, but
Well, they should be staggered terms, but I think for local government, I feel uneasy about anybody having over a 3-year term. It takes a couple of years really to get the feet wet. So you get 1 good year.
Are there other questions? Thank you, Chief Bennett. I do want to acknowledge at this time that we have Madam President of the Assembly present with us tonight, Ms. Dodson.
Also,
Another Assembly member, Mr. Graham. And I don't see Mr. Van Ness. Did you wish to be heard?
About the same company as the president of the would like to talk. Commissioners, I'm Darrell Dennis. Known to some of you as a short timer, and also like you to know that I went to high school. I'm also a long timer. I'd like to make just a few pointed comments. I'll return another day to talk about detailed problems of transition, liabilities, and assets. I very much favor the independent, strong mayor rather than the council manager form of government. The basic idea of the council manager form of government is that the municipal corporation is a business corporation providing services, street maintenance, fire protection, police protection. That needs a capable business manager. The council is a group of overseers. It's not a legislative body. With the independent mayor, we have a focus of executive leadership which is political. And no matter how you try to define it otherwise, a local government is political. Whether it's a small town or a big city. In a town with a stable population, either a dominant class, a widespread single class, which everyone thinks the same. A manager is generally quite effective because there are competing interests to reconcile. The council can be a group of overseers because the work is fairly routine. The town growing as rapidly as ours, with many diverse interests and needs, we need to have someone in a position of authority and leadership to provide leadership. We need a council which is not a group of overseers or superintendents, but a group of thinkers and legislators. If we were in a population that's reaching 200,000, to have a council which is a group of overseers or even a manager, I think we'd have an overtaxed council. A council which simply couldn't provide the talents needed to monitor and guide that manager. With the independent mayor, we have that ability. The independent mayor can provide not only political leadership, but also the control needed with bureaucratic professional staff. The borough government is not perfect. The city government has been very efficient for the size that it serves. There are good features of both. The talent of the city manager is very much needed even under the independent mayor. And I would imagine that you would write into the charter the provisions for executive department heads. And there you would find the professional leadership that the independent political mayor would need to run an effective business corporation, because even as I've been describing a political corporation, the municipality does provide services, it needs to be fiscally efficient. That reason, as well as having an independent mayor, an independent council, I would also suggest that we use the service district concept. Some people desire more municipal service than others, some far less. The service district concept is fairly unique. It's not found in many other states, and it's very effective here. I think it should be continued. The multi-member scheme we have now for the assembly, I don't think is what the citizens want. I talked to my own neighbors, asking them why they voted for it. It was offered back during the fall. It was the only thing on the ballot. They weren't offered a scheme of single-member districts. They were offered a scheme of multi-member districts. And most of my neighbors voted for it because they're tired of hearing the issue. This is one way to become civil. But they all had in the back of their minds that the issue would come again with unification, and they would have a chance then to vote for what they wanted. Not something which was just a compromise. The single-member, multiple districts provides a closer relationship between the citizen and his representative. It prevents this amorphous feeling that I heard of this hearing last night in the city council chambers, that with elections at large, with multi-member representation, the citizen doesn't really know who his representative is. It's just somebody out there who may or may not know about his own particular neighborhood. With a single-member district, whether it's 9 or 11, there's far more likelihood, especially if the representative who lives in and is voted by that constituency, of knowing his neighbors and speaking for them. I don't think the argument that having enough pull or enough sway and was elected from a poor district rather than a rich one is valid. The other concern which has been raised in many of these meetings is the ombudsman. It all knows. The ombudsman is perhaps a national fad. It's nothing peculiar to people living in the borough and not the city. It's found in almost every state, every large city. And if the ombudsman scheme seems somewhat exotic, you might consider an independently elected municipal attorney. Some states are finding now that the elected attorney general is quite opposite of the ombudsman. They don't. So one of them didn't know they had. If he's an independent elected attorney general, it's quite possible he can perform the administrative investigation duties. Ombudsman in Scandinavian style, and also use his legal abilities and talents to make them more effective. I'm going to close on that. I'll come back another time to talk about detail. Transitional problem. If you have any questions about this.
Are there any questions?
Mr. Chairman, only one thing. Darrell, why are you coming back later to talk about transitional? I mean, are you going to come at a specific time? Will it be fairly soon? Because I think we would value your input at a relatively early time. And, you know, we're having a series of 4 public hearings. Then we'll be meeting on Thursday nights. There's 2 ways. You can either sit and listen to us and then come under persons to be heard, or several days before the meeting you can contact the executive secretary and arrange for an appearance request. But I would hope your input could come fairly soon.
Try.
You spoke in favor of a single-member district. How many people would you envision on a legislative body in that case, proper representation?
With a metropolis our size and villages between 9 and 10. And a big
Would that cover all? Would that give you the
I
coverage?
think that would be sufficient. I think that people would want more representatives. They certainly have, and the member would not be willing to pay the council's salaries, go to that many elections. It's quite possible that by the year 1990, we might even have a bicameral legislature with 20 or 30 councilmen. But I think at the present time, somewhere between 9 and 12 would be sufficient.
Could we not approach it with a community council and achieve the same thing and still be multi-member?
No, the community council is an excellent idea. And I think the neighborhood government is going to be favored mostly by the activists in the neighborhood, and that the official in the public goldfish bowl representative is the one doing the weird populist will look. And if there's one, they can identify with that person more quickly than they can with 2 or 3 or 4.
Thank you.
Are you involved in government now?
Yes, I teach government at the university.
Are there any other questions?
Yes.
Mr. Parsons?
I don't understand why size has anything to do with bicameral aspects of government.
It's generally found that people don't want to pay the cost of providing a bicameral municipal legislature until the town is very large. I personally wouldn't want to pay that many legislative salaries until we were a population of, say, 500,000. The cost of 20 legislatures wouldn't be any more than it is for mine today.
Then you're implying that as we grow, we're going to have to increase the size of our legislative body.
I think we'll probably need another legislature or 2. We may not need a 2-step council, but we'll certainly need another district or so.
Are there other questions, Mr. Vaness?
Mr. Chairman? Maybe just, I'd like to draw you out a little bit on this matter of council, because you've given it so much thought. If Anchorage grows, say, not to 500,000 people, but to 350,000, can we really say that in 11 single-member districts there would be more identification with one's councilman than there would be if we had multi-member districts, given the fact that the multi-member district would compel the use of, which some say is undesirable, I understand, but would compel the use of media and other kinds of communication between the elected official and his constituents?
Personalities alone could make the multi-member district far more representative than the single-member district. We can always rely on personalities to provide that representation. We can always rely on the media being properly understood and properly exercised. I think that the size of the population isn't any clues to how many districts we need. It's a matter of the whole culture, the way people feel, what it is they want to have expressed in the government. If we were 300,000 people and we all felt the same, we might get away with just having a king. If we are 300,000 people and we all have different ideas, we certainly need at least 9 different representatives.
Are there other questions? Thank you very much and I do hope have some input for the transitional measures that you do fairly soon.
Thank you.
Mrs. Dodson? I think Mrs. Dodson had
Having sat through many long public hearings, I will have an opportunity to speak to the Charter Commission when you meet with the Assembly, and I'd rather not take the time here and now because people that want to speak, and I think you should hear from as many of them as you can. So I'll hold off till
Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, would it be fair or not to ask Mrs. Dodson a question, one that I'd like to possibly toss back at some other people, or would you prefer that we would wait?
Well, no, if she...
Chairman, I wish she would talk tonight in addition to Monday because it adds a flavor to the specific hearings that I think is educational for all of us in the audience and the group.
Well, I'm perfectly willing to. I just hate to sit through long public hearings.
We'll ask you.
All right. Why don't you ask me?
Okay. Mr. Chairman, Jesse, I do have a question. If the form of government were to be the elected executive with the separate legislative body, assembly, or council, the last charter provided for the legislative body to hire its own attorney and its own staff. There's been a lot of discussion that I've heard over the years as the present assembly feeling that would be desirable. And I can just see such a tremendous conflict in that way. I wonder if you could comment as to whether, would you be getting two structures in effect if you followed that approach?
Well, I think at this point, with the size of government we have, I think it would be an expensive luxury. And I don't feel it's really all that necessary. I think there's only a few instances when there really becomes a crisis of law between the legislative body and the executive. And I think that the Assembly has always maintained a prerogative and has always had a contingency fund that we can go and hire an attorney for a specific case or consultation. I really, at this point, don't think we need to hire our own staff and our own attorney. I think it's just far more expensive than we really need for local government.
Do you think, though, that, say, as the community would grow, and obviously we're going to grow and we've got to think in terms of something that will last, that that's an important prerogative to have? Is there a point when you think that research staff in that, too?
I think that this, in the future, might well be needed, and I think that Joel, as our Assembly Ombudsman, is performing a good task for us. But right now, he's not serving the function as, to my knowledge, as a legislative researcher, but as generally a problem solver, and he's serving that function that probably takes a lot of the weight off of us, that people, instead of coming to us and to Joel, and if they didn't have Joel there, they would come to us and say, "Gee whiz, Jesse, I'm having trouble." They go tell Joel that.
Okay, fine. Thanks, Jesse.
Mr. Fisher?
Ms. Dodson. Then, as I'm to understand it, your testimony would be that the right ought to be there for the Assembly to hire any staff that it so wishes sometime in the future. Does the Assembly now have that prerogative?
Yes. Yes. We at the present time can hire.
That's never been questioned.
No, not trying to.
It used to be questioned when I was there.
Yeah, right.
No.
That's interesting. That's good.
Mr. Chairman.
Mrs. Roney?
Jesse, I can envision that there might be a time that the Assembly might not want to hire just an attorney, which I understand we have the right to, but might wish to hire somebody in the finance field or somebody in the public works field that were their staff persons to answer questions in that line. But perhaps the right to get additional input other than through administration might be desirable. Did you mean that it would have this wider capability of bringing in a consultant or a researcher on one particular field would be desirable, or did you just mean the term?
No, I think that this would always be the prerogative of the legislative body to hire any kind of a management consultant, a financial consultant. This is one of the checks and balances that exists in the government. And I certainly would think that it should be there.
Just to clarify, thank you. Just to clarify a point, the questions that have been put to you on this line assumed an independent executive,
That's correct.
Yeah,
Right.
That's
that's
correct.
what I was.
and whether the same considerations would apply in a council manager system would be a different
Yeah.
issue. Okay.
Mr. Shy?
Jesse, in the previous testimony, it's got me thinking a little bit. You know, we talk about unification, and yet we talk about single-member districts, which to me smacks of sectionalism. Now, do I have a fear there, or am I on the right track, or am I wrong? Are we getting into sectionalism if we run single-member?
I don't see it that way at all. Because I think what you get, and I found this to be particularly true, is that with a single-member district, I have special particular interest that right in this particular area, this is my district, and as I drive around the streets, I see a particular problem, and I may take that problem to public works. This is, I sort of feel a special responsibility to this district, but I also think that generally the assembly people in general feel a concern for the whole area. But I think it gives a chance for there to be a little special attention to certain districts. I don't think it implies any parochialism or favoritism on that district, but I think it does maybe give a little special attention. And it also gives the added ability, and this is my really main concern with single-member districts, is that I can afford to run from a single-member district. And I think I might find it very difficult to run at large in this day and age when you have TV time and media time such as it is. And in a single-member district, you have a smaller number of people and you can get out to meet the people. And I think that is perhaps the real thing that would influence me, is the cost of running a campaign to become elected, and I think it allows a lot more people the opportunity to serve.
Shouldn't we separate those two? I mean, the cost of running a campaign is quite separate from representation. I mean, I don't see it marrying the two.
Well, I think that you have a better chance to get representation from various areas. I think you're going to limit your person who can serve on that legislative body if you have an area-wide campaign.
May I ask a question? Are you absolutely convinced that in a single-member district, what would you think about a multi-member district with, say, designated seats?
Yeah, I don't find too much quarrel with that. I can accept either one. As somebody pointed out, this was a compromise, but I don't think it was a bad compromise. Well, I think that it has some certain advantages in that in most of the districts there are 3 members, and so therefore you have a chance to express yourself every year with a staggered seats. And I think that has some advantage.
Along that line, an idea came to my head last night when we were exploring this. Say you have 4 districts, maybe 3 representatives in each of those districts or something like that. But that you subdivide that district into thirds and maybe you run from a district, but you're voted for out of that larger district. In other words,
I think you would essentially do that. You might require then the residency. I think that gets kind of complicated.
yeah, we've heard so many that we get excited by everything new that sounds like it might work. By the way, do you have a point of view on whether you prefer the mayor council or strong mayor?
I favor the strong mayor. I feel that that's probably the way we should go.
The separate executive, you mean?
Yes.
Because
Separate
many
from the-
think of this present city council having a strong mayor, but you mean the
No,
elect-
this is the mayor not being part of the legislative process.
Strong mayor with veto.
Right.
I have another question. Jesse, did you look into the cost of just sending out one mailing to say the voters in the previous election and this multiple man district this time?
No, I didn't have some time, but I know what mailing costs area-wide.
Well, it would have cost somewhere between $600 and $700, I believe, for a four-man district to send out one mailing to the previous voters. Do you think that is going to limit the number that are willing to
That was virtually my whole campaign when I ran district sometime.
Well, I felt that the raise in cost for an unknown to run in a four-man district the ante had been raised 3 times practically.
Are there other questions of Mrs. Dodson?
Mr. Chairman, what is the statutory situation now, if any, with respect to spending limitations for local office?
None that apply to local governments.
That is something the charter could address, of course.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Dodson. Mrs. Whitson has been a very faithful attender and is here tonight and asked to be heard.
Can't hear you back there. But I think you were looking at me. My name is Judy Whitson. I live at 22nd and D Street. I know it's far most interesting for you people if someone sits here and talks to you. But I find that when I try to do that, I'm inclined to get to the middle of a sentence and forget where I am. So please forgive me while I read it. I'm starting out with the premise that the function of the local government is to protect our rights and to provide an atmosphere that allows us the opportunity to attain the highest quality of life that we're capable of achieving. I offer the following preamble. We, the people of Anchorage, in order to protect our individual rights and promote the highest quality of life, hereby establish this charter. So the charter needs to address the question of how to achieve these things. And certain of these things need to be guaranteed. For instance, the traditional rights. Those are already guaranteed by federal and state governments, and maybe that's enough. Some people have thought that we need to reiterate some of those. Non-discrimination, I've heard mentioned. Certain powers need to be limited just to the people. For example, the people only should vote for any bills with major impact. The people only should vote for any new taxes for any purpose, and also for any taxes for any new purpose. Public hearings, and then having the assembly make decisions, or council or whatever, just isn't good enough. it can't really tell what the majority wants on a really controversial issue. The people who come to the hearings are involved with the issue or with the government, or they're part of a special interest group. They may or may not reflect what the community as a whole wants. Federal and state powers should be limited wherever possible. For example, when there's a question of who has jurisdiction, for instance, where a road should go or what kind of a road that should be, that power needs to be the one that's the very closest to the people. We need protection from specialized taxes on minority groups. An example, of course, is the hotel motel tax. Only people who will be paying for a tax should vote to institute it. All the people should be allowed to vote on sales tax. Property owners should be the one who vote for or against a property tax. Fishermen should be the ones to vote for or against a tax on king crab, and dry cleaners should be the ones to vote for or against a tax on dry cleaning. Otherwise, there's no end, there's no stop to the discrimination. It just isn't all that difficult to get someone to vote for a tax that taxes someone else. The only way the hotel motel tax might be valid would be if the hotel motel owners only had voted for it, and if proceeds were to be used for something that benefited them, as though it were a service district type concept. For instance, to build a convention center. There should be a fixed limit on the amount of taxation, and not just a limit on the mill rate on the property tax, but a limit that also addresses any new tax that might ever be instituted. Something that says if you have a sales tax, it can never be more than such and such a percent. If you have an income tax, it must have a certain standard deduction and can never be higher than a certain percent. There should be a guarantee of no taxes more than one for a general fund. There should be...
Would you repeat that?
Yeah.
Again? We didn't hear that last.
No taxes more than one. No more than one tax
Single tax.
for a general type tax. There should be a feedback guarantee of some kind. Probably similar to the questionnaire that Mary Crony has proposed to send along tax assessments or billings once a year. There should be a guarantee that no money will be spent for some things, like charities. Government giving to charities is a flagrant misuse of my money. Funds should not be used to pay for any service citizens don't want or don't want to pay for. Here we get into what I call free ice cream syndrome. This is another problem Mary's been concerned about, although she doesn't call it by that name. This concerns the small town that had one ice cream parlor. There was just enough business that the owner, Mr. Charlie Vanilla, could charge 10 cents per ice cream and stay in business and make a small profit. But not everyone could afford the 10 cents. And a lot of people liked ice cream enough that they wished it were only a nickel. So the Distinguished 11 ordered a survey to see if ice cream would be a valid function of government. The results of the survey were overwhelming. 98% of all residents in the small town said they would eat ice cream at least twice as often if the government would give to them for only a nickel. The Distinguished 11, of course, confronted with conclusive evidence that there was an unfilled community need, were compelled to remedy the situation. Of course, we all know the end to the story. The new 11 Distinguished Flavors ice cream parlor is doing a booming business. Charlie couldn't compete with the government. He's on welfare. Taxes went up slightly. And the citizens of the small town are so pleased with nickel ice cream that they've asked the Distinguished 11 to order similar surveys on hamburgers and picture shows. What the citizens don't see is that they've lost at least two freedoms. The right to enter into business in the field of ice cream has been virtually destroyed. And the free choice of whether or not to buy ice cream has been completely eliminated. In addition, the economics have gotten cloudy enough that the people can no longer tell if they can even afford ice cream. It might help to protect our individual rights if we had a method to deal with old laws, where appropriate a time limit might be put on them, where they would either expire automatically or expire without reaffirmation by the legislative body. I've heard one suggestion that there be another legislative body to repeal old laws, as well as a legislative body to enact new ones. One of the most important ways to protect individual rights is to make maximum use of the service area, to help protect the individual who doesn't use a service from having to pay for it. Having the user pay is one good step towards the ability of the people to reduce the government if they so desire. In a service district, people are closer to the power that's spending their money than if a general fund concept is used. Again, the Assembly can't really know what the majority really wants through hearings. It's better to have a service district that can vote to spend its own money. Protection of rights is the easiest of the functions of government as set forth in my preamble. There isn't any problem with protecting individual rights after you decide what those rights are. A little more controversial is the problem of how to achieve the highest quality of life. But even there are some things that can't be argued much. For instance, wouldn't it be nice if we could reduce or eliminate taxes? This could be done, at least partly, by having service districts with services voted up or down by the people at a very local level to pay for nearly all services, and by outlawing government monopolies so private enterprise could provide services if that were what the people wanted. So that if the people did choose and contracted all services with private companies, all that would be left for the local government to spend money on, besides perhaps police protection and courts, would be a very minimal, hopefully, general fund that might be paid for by a lottery, for example. And that's just an example. I realize that as of now, at least, that's against state law. But I don't think that's any reason to shut out the possibility within the charter, just in case it does become legal. It's very, very important to not only leave the door open for the best of all possible worlds, but to prop it open and demand in the charter that it stay open. We need to protect our freedom to do whatever works, whatever's good, just so long as others' rights aren't infringed. For example, one of our governments is working on a provision that would require the owner of undeveloped land to prove that public services and utilities can be provided before development can take place. While it's true that having public water and sewer, for instance, is better than scooping water out of the creek and pouring sewage back in, it isn't necessarily the best of all worlds. The government system sucks the water out of the ground, uses it, purifies it a little bit, and flushes it into the ocean. For all practical purposes, it's used up. Far better, and maybe best, would be sucking it out of the ground, using it, purifying it, and putting it right back into the ground. All that's used up is a minuscule amount that transpires into the air. For all practical purposes, it isn't used up at all. Another example might be roads, where the government decrees that they be X number of feet wide and straight as an arrow, which is what happened at our house. That's okay if there are good reasons, like fire protection. It's an arbitrary law, it's bad, and we need protection from it. It needs to be impossible for the government to deny us the right to achieve the best if we're ingenious enough, capable enough, or even just plain rich enough to do so. Maybe a charter could address this by making a new law have to be based on protection of rights. We need protection from government monopolies. At present, there are some services that I may not obtain from free enterprise, even if I'm willing to pay the public utility as well as a private one. But further than that, if a private fire department or a private school can provide me service cheaper and or better, I want that choice without paying twice. How to do that is a toughie, but the service area concept helps. If the user pays, he at least knows how much it costs him, and hopefully at vote time he can vote it down if he's unhappy and do something different. In the area of schools, tax credits might work. They might at least help. If tax credits and that kind of thing can't be directly addressed in the charter, at least keep this in mind during the writing of the education and finance sections, and don't let it get ruled out. Another protection we need to attain the very best is protection from too much redistribution of wealth. One of my friends expressed to me her concern for all the people in this community. There is room here in Anchorage for a tremendous variety of lifestyles, and we should see that these are provided for. She would naturally do this democratically, which means that if my lifestyle includes bicycle trails, I'm in luck. If my lifestyle includes scuba diving, well, I'm quite free to go scuba diving, if I can afford it after I pay for the bicycle trails. Most people feel that some social or welfare programs are necessary, but let's have a limit. Again, through the user pays concept wherever possible. If there's really a need for something, someone will figure out how to make a profit from it. Just if you let him. There are other ways to benefit the poor than by taxing all the people. An example would be the private bus system in Phoenix that's paid for completely by advertising. The riders ride free. Another example is Thomas Edison. He did more for the poor and disadvantaged of this country simply by working for his own gain than all the social programs in history. I realize that even if the Charter Commission desired, the Charter alone couldn't do these things single-handedly or all at once, but it can provide the atmosphere and freedom in which they can be done. Maybe with a Bill of Rights, setting forth those things listed above. That would not only help provide the right atmosphere it also might be a pretty strong selling point for the document. The local government should make maximum use of the voters' power for making decisions. The power of the government should be severely limited, particularly regarding the use of my money. We need limits on the amount we can be taxed. We need service districts. We need potential in the charter for doing things later that might possibly be illegal now. Make sure that each word you write reflects not only what you would like to happen as soon as the charter is passed, but also what you would like as an absolute ideal. We need a statement making government monopolies illegal. We need a statement that laws should be based on protection of rights rather than prescribed method. If all the things I've talked about are addressed, the organization of the new government is relatively unimportant. If a government can't do such and such, it doesn't matter to me at all whether it's a mayor or an assembly or a council or an appointed official who hasn't got the power to do it. However, the mechanics become increasingly important as government is less limited. And since the government will most assuredly be less restrained than I would like, I favor the following. Mayor and veto power. Small districts. The small districts because you know the candidate, you can afford to run for office, and the only real objection I've heard, which is coming up with a poor elected official, doesn't seem that major. The bowl area is small enough that you can go talk to another one. It's easy. Any questions?
Are there any questions, Ms. Whitson?
Yeah, give us your written reports of the calls and everything.
Not tonight, but on the
Yeah, some of it takes a little time to digest.
I thought somebody'd asked about services like the fire department.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Parsons?
ice cream.
Ice cream, I don't like that.
I asked this at another hearing as to where you draw the limits. I think library services should be free. Maybe you don't think they should be free. And where do we draw the line on what services to provide? Life, protective services, and the basic, like fire and police, period?
Well, police, period, is what I would say. Fire, for instance, the one place that I know of where a private company is providing fire service, the people are getting it a whole lot cheaper than they ever did when it was government, and there's no coercion. I mean, the people are not forced to pay for it whether they want it or not. It's cheaper, it's better. It's a good thing.
Try.
Where is this private fire
That's
service
in
being provided?
Flagstaff, Arizona.
Because the thing that I was thinking about when you were talking about this private fire department, for any business, for any private enterprise to succeed, it has to have a pretty good base to operate with. Otherwise, it doesn't make a profit. It has to have pretty much an assured guarantee of usage by so many people. For it to succeed with the population we have here, what we'd have to do in the case that you bring up is probably have Hertz go in and renting fire engines. Every time there's a fire, the people run down, rent an engine, go put the fire out, return the engine, and they'd be ahead. They'd make a profit on that basis. That's the way it would work up there.
I don't believe that.
Mr. Sheffield?
Well, talking about fire departments or what they do or what they don't do, I would imagine that the fire insurance rates are probably lower if you have a good fire department than if you have one that just comes when they happen to be there. But we had this topic come up a couple nights ago, or one of our other public hearings, and I forgot to ask the person what they thought about the fire insurance rates. But I remember 25 years ago and 20 years ago in Anchorage, that every time the city of Anchorage added a fire truck or got another fire station, your rates came down. They filed another rate case, and it's just not what it costs to have the fire protection wherever. I think that the insurance rates have something to do with it too for the individual people.
Oh, I definitely think so. But if you have a fire department that's providing better service, your rates are going to go down.
Mr. Chairman, Judy, do you know what sort of fire rating Flagstaff has?
No.
That would be interesting to know.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Josephson?
I appreciate Judy's testimony because Judy, for one thing, has followed us so closely over the weeks, and I know you're going to stay with it too. I can predict that. And what is sort of surprising to me is that you and I disagree about almost everything, but that I don't think I would write the charter terribly differently from the way you would write it. So it may not be important to air these philosophical differences, but I'll just take a second to do so you know where I'm coming from. First of all, it seems to me that what you're really suggesting is that we could dispense with taxation because we would just voluntarily, with a tin can or something, collect from each other for those things we would voluntarily want to do for ourselves. And I have understood that taxation has always been a means of taking money from where it is and putting it to where it's needed. And I believe in that. Just philosophically, I think that that's what should happen. You don't.
Answer that?
No, I just want to make that clear because I think it's just only fair that we get this out and kick it around first. I do agree with you, I think, essentially on the service area issue, and I do agree with you on many of the other things that you said about writing a charter. But the other thing I wanted to point out is that, and Mr. Garnett can correct me, as you said, many of the things that you would like to see in the charter cannot be done. And I think one of the things that cannot be done is that we would provide, for example, that only people who would pay a tax would vote on that tax. I think the Supreme Court of the United States has taken care of that question, and that in fact, it was the rule once that on bond issues, only property owners in Anchorage were entitled to vote on the question because only their property in any sense was bound to pay the tax. And in an area with many transients, there was perhaps good reason philosophically to have that rule. But within the last 10 years, the Supreme Court of the United States has said that even our transient citizens who own no property can vote on those issues, and I think that those provisions, those decisions bind us. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Mrs. Holmes?
I'd like to follow up just very quickly on the idea of state, federal, and local. You mentioned, I think, at one point that you wanted to see local control over state and federal things wherever possible. Aren't we pretty limited about what we can do as far as locally controlling something that's in a state or federal law?
Yes.
Simply stated,
I
yes.
think this is another area where we just don't have a lot of choice in the charter. The other thing that just occurred to me was you mentioned a Bill of Rights, which is an interesting concept, for setting out a philosophy. But as I recall, a survey was done a few years ago with our National Bill of Rights, and people were asked, not labeling it as a Bill of Rights, but if you had to vote on this document tomorrow, what would you do? And most people disagreed with it would not have voted it in. So I don't think we gained a single thing by it.
I don't think that's any reason for doing away with freedom of speech, for instance.
No,
I think the Bill of
no,
Rights
but
is the most important document we have, no matter what the survey said.
I think we're guaranteed a lot of the basic rights by federal law, which we can't do away with locally. And that anything else we would put in as a sort of a Bill of Rights would not necessarily help us.
Mr. Chairman?
Mrs. Sturley.
Judy, do you think it's important that we, I've got a bad back, so if I'm sitting here grimacing, it's only because I'm about to die. Do you think it's important that we write a charter that the voters will accept?
Yes.
You do, I mean, you believe in the concept of unification and a charter.
I believe in the concept of better government, and I think that you could write a charter that would be better than what we've got now. I don't much care if we have two small governments or one bigger one, but I'd rather have one bigger, better one than two smaller, not so good ones.
Well, do you think in that case we're going to have to listen very carefully to, say, the poll, to the opinion poll, and some of the other things? I think some of the things that you have presented are not ones perhaps as popularly talked about, and I'm just wondering if you didn't see those things, for instance, in a charter, would you then not support the charter?
Me personally?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it depends on what is in the charter.
I just wondered.
If what's in the charter is better for me than what we've got now, yes, I'll vote for it.
You would look carefully at what the existing is,
Yes.
and not necessarily feel that you had to reach an ideal in order to be able to support it.
Definitely.
No, I'm just.
I've got no idea in the world that you'd take this and write it down.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, if I can influence you in one area.
Fine. That's a fair answer.
There is one other thing that I wanted to mention. And that's, there was some discussion at one time about putting into this document something about the comprehensive plan. I think it was Dick Fisher who the other night said perhaps comprehensive plan should be combined with finance. And I think that's a pretty good idea, as much as I've thought about it. But about comprehensive in general, and as a piece of the charter, I think it would be a very bad mistake to put that in there. The borough is now working on the comprehensive plan, what they call a comprehensive plan. And supposedly it will be before the public before too long. And if it gets before the public at the same time that this thing is before the public, comprehensive plan and comprehensive plan will be equated. They'll be thought of as exactly the same thing, whether that's the intent or not. And if they don't change that comprehensive plan that they're working on now, it's going to be extremely controversial.
Mr. Joseph?
Yeah,
I think about it for a little while, and you'll come to the conclusion that I did, that the people who want the comprehensive plan in this document are people who are quite politically aware and people who already want unification and want the charter. So if you leave comprehensive plan out, you aren't going to be losing anything. But if you put it in, and that other thing gets before the public, you're going to lose a whole bunch of votes.
Joseph?
you made reference to one other thing that struck me, and that was the bike riding and scuba diving analogy. And it struck me...
No, I don't want you to pay for scuba diving.
What? Well, the scuba diving, of course, is something that can be physically done by an entrepreneur. development of a bike trail may not be able to be done as easily, at least, would you concede, by a private entrepreneur, given the fact that you need a large area for one thing, and perhaps the right to acquire right-of-way and other issues to get a bike trail? But I was going to ask you, where do you see park powers? Should that be done by private enterprise, or is that an appropriate government activity?
Well, I think that gets a whole lot deeper into the thing than any of us can go now, because in order to change the way the parks are provided for, you'd have to get down to the very, very basics of our whole tax structure and way too much. Under an ideal system, no, I don't think the government should provide for parks. Under the system we have right now, obviously they have to, or have it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Are there other questions of Ms. Whitson? Thank you very much for being here. Joe? Are there others to be heard? You, Mr. DeVore? Start here, and then Mr. Wells, Mr. Graham. Mr. DeVore?
My name is Joel DeVore, and I live at 804 G Street. I'd like to begin with an awkward compliment. I haven't seen many bodies of elected officials listen as intently as you have, and it makes a witness a little bit nervous that he might be taken too seriously.
Yep.
That's kind of neat.
I'd like to make a few comments about the ombudsman question. I'd like to begin just with a quick defense of the proposal. I think the ombudsman gives a citizen a second chance at resolving a problem he has. He may go to the administrator and talk over the problem, and it may be worked out there. Those aren't the kind of problems that ombudsman get. The citizen may be dissatisfied and may not carry it any further, feeling it's hopeless. Then he may go to the ombudsman as a second chance. That's the big value of an ombudsman. In my daytime role in February, I received about 70 cases. So just with half of the local government we have here. And I think that demonstrates at least some need. I think that elected officials, the mayor, the assembly, and the administrators serve as ombudsmen sometimes. I don't feel that they always do, as they're not always the second court of appeals. And I don't feel that they always have the time to make it a full-time job. There's a key difference between ombudsmen and the mayor or the assembly, and that is that they're tied to policy. They make policy, and to an extent they may tend to defend that policy and how it operates. An ombudsman who's independent from the mayor and is protected from the legislative body can be more objective in defending how that policy works in its day-to-day operation. I think that's one good reason for having an ombudsman and for making him independent of the mayor and somewhat protected from the legislative body. I feel he really needs to be responsible. I don't feel his term should be unlimited. I support the concept that was in the past charter of a limited term. In that instance, I think it was 5 years, and 3, 4, or 5 years would seem appropriate to me. I think that he also should be able to be removed at any time before that period by a 2/3 vote of the body. The really key question is whether or not to include it in the charter. And that, I have to admit, I'm waffling on myself. It comes down to a question of whether or not the ombudsman is a fundamental part of the government. It can be viewed as a fundamental, basic part as basic as the attorney was written into the charter the last time. To protect the citizen against the day-to-day common administrative abuse that might be forgotten, ignored, or passed off. Or it could be viewed as something that should be a legislative proposal and operate something like an equal employment opportunity officer, and I can see it operating in either fashion. I'm surprised to see the public acclaim for the ombudsman, which makes me consider seriously the idea of putting it in the charter as a basic fundamental protection against the day-to-day administration of the government. That is about the essence of my comments. If you would choose to put the ombudsman in the charter, I would hope that it would be in the classic, following the classic model of ombudsman, which is to be an agency of legislative body, independent of the mayor, protected from the legislative body.
Are there any questions, Mr. Harless?
Mr. Chairman, Joel, not to get into specifics, but could you give us kind of an overall capsule of those questions that they receive? Is it just down to lack of responsiveness, would you say, or is it more that people don't understand government so complex so they don't know where to go? Could you categorize a bit?
Along the way, they may have complained to zoning enforcement about a practice going on in the neighborhood, and 9 months has gone by and they haven't heard a single word back, and they think it's forgotten, and they feel they've been abused. The government official hasn't been doing his job, and probably the majority of the complaints about government officials is not that they're doing something wrong, they're not doing something. And in many cases I find that they actually are. People just haven't gotten word back on what happened to their complaint. Or in many cases it's a lot of the calls are informational. Where do I go to find out about this? Or I feel this way, and at least if you get back with a basic explanation of the existing policy, it makes me feel a little more confident in the operation.
Just to comment, I hope this young man's present job doesn't prohibit him from assisting the commission when we get into matters of apportionment and districting. He's had a lot of background. I think he's pretty cool.
Mr. Josephson?
What is your ultimate power or sanction?
To recommend.
You go to is your ultimate that you go back to the assembly and say, I've been unable to get cooperation on this matter?
I doubt that will happen very often at all.
Does the ordinance give you explicit power to call in the press and explain to them through exposure, explain to the community through exposure that there's a wrong that needs to be righted?
There is no ordinance.
I see.
I operate now essentially under a resolution.
I see.
Ran in those about, and it does not preclude that at all.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Troney?
I think that Joe has given to the Assembly a list of the items that he took care of during January and February, and I think he would be happy to give us any 1 month so that you can look over and see the sort of things he's handling. He described to me today a particular question that was asked of all departments, and it has caused a reassessment by the administration of the policy that's presently in effect. And without any push or pull or anything, it looks like there may be a change in policy because of the information that was brought out when he insisted on getting the answer to a question for a citizen. This is the sort of function that is good for an ombudsman. Now, of course, the percentage of things that he looks into that does, in the natural course of events, cause the administration to take a reassessment of policy probably is very minor in proportion to the number of questions he answers. But I will assure you this has happened, and I think it's happened in other cases than what he mentioned today to me.
just pursue one item. Do you find this, that members of the assembly come to you and say, a constituent of mine has asked me to do so-and-so, will you find out about it and report back to me?
Yes, I do.
And you don't have any concern that may make assembly persons less responsive, but in fact it makes them more so? I mean, it doesn't...
I think so, because it gives the legislative body a full-time staff member to solve a lot of the minor problems. The ombudsman also can serve in a research capacity, too, which is an advantage that it's done some places and not done other places. Currently at the borough, it's operating in a fashion where the ombudsman is busy with problems and doesn't have a lot of time for the research. That's
Mrs. Holmes?
Joel, do you think that an ombudsman would function as well under the council manager form of government? Or do you have any thoughts on that?
I'm certain he could function as well. To what extent he was replaced by the mayor, I'm not really certain. I still have the same feelings that the mayor still is involved with policy, and if for no other reason than the citizens' suspicion that the answer he's gotten is not necessarily objective, would tend to make me say an ombudsman is still necessary in that form of government.
Are there other questions of Mr. DeBoer? No, thank you very much, and I think if you could give Evie a copy of something for a month or so, appreciate it. I see Mr. Graham had asked for the chair, and I think I'll take the privilege of a chair and offer the hot seat to Mr. Graham.
The charter should have a strong dose of justice and equity, especially if it's going to be a good charter. It has to be lived with a long time, and also that will make it quite palatable to the voters, which have to be convinced. I'll only touch on two areas, but I think they're basic to some of your major problems. When the borough concept started out, there was a first and a second class borough. Well, we drifted from that. Because over the years, the municipal governments have gone down to the legislature, and they've asked for added powers for the second class borough. And they've also provided for permissive powers. And the various governments have implemented some of that. And either the last legislature or the preceding one, I think it was the last, redid the municipal code, which gave us another dose of change on what the second-class borough is. So today, we don't have the real distinction that we started out with between the first and the second-class borough. And we certainly don't have it in our area here, because we're very close to approaching the first-class status, really. Now, it's probably a semantical problem, but when this thing gets presented to the voters, I don't believe the voters want, the majority of the voters don't want the home rule first-class status. City voters think they need it for their own protection. But if they realize how far we've gone from second-class status, I don't think they'll be so insistent as they have previously been. I think the only area you have to consider this is in connection with the service districts. If you can preserve that element in the charter, so that
future powers are not completely in the hands of the council, but have to be voted on by the electorate, I think you will satisfy a great number of people. And I think if it's explained properly, that it really won't take anything away from the city residents. If you're evolving government, and they're not going to have one iota less than they have right now, really, I think they're spiritual advantage. It's a matter of explaining it properly. Now, the other point is that the nation is supposed to be founded on a Republican form of government, or a republic. And that means that we should have representative government. In my view of our community over 20 years, we have not yet got representative government. Benny Leonard and Bill Tobin say, keep repeating the old phrase, we have to get the best people. But that doesn't fit in with the basic thing we're supposed to be working on. That is, we're supposed to have representative government. And then your definition of what the best people are can get very hairy too. And there's no place in any statute or any place that says the best people are supposed to do all the ruling. So we get down to what has happened in the last 2 years. Outside of the city, assemblymen were elected by district. Inside of the city, they were at large elected and then appointed to the assembly by the council. And the council, despite the Fairbanks case, was very adamant in trying to preserve the old feudal status quo. And they were so definite about it that when, even after the ordinance was passed to change the districts, whenever they don't get their own way, of course, they run right down to court and try to tie things up for years. The result was an election was coming on. An election had to be had, and so an unhappy compromise was made. Multi-member districts. That's like a half-baked cake. Really satisfies nobody. And I think that's the position Mr. Ford finds himself in today, trying to satisfy everybody by not taking a real strong stand. After about 2 years, he's going to end up finding he pleased nobody and everybody's his enemy. And I think we're kind of in that situation too. Just to make the compromise, not to get the things settled properly, we'll live with it. And I'll show you why that doesn't work too well. In the last election I was in, 5,500 voters in the district. And that was the single-member district. And I'm ashamed to say it, but I spent over $5,000. And I don't think, even in that election, the real issues were ever gotten out to the voter, which is a very detrimental thing in our electoral process. Well, if they're not gotten out to the voter with the expenditure of that kind of money, in a single-member district, going to the multi-member district will make it even worse. And in our present district now that Jesse and I are in, I think the population is between 12 and 15,000. Well, if we can't adequately reach 5,000 or 5,500, it's very unlikely that we're going to do a good job reaching 12 to 15,000. And then also take the last election that the borough had, the district to the south here, the Sand Lake district. Paper reported the other day that somebody spent a horrendous $12,000 on that election. That is terrible. It makes you wonder connected with his job, the remuneration just isn't that great. So where does this other fervor to spend all that money come from? I believe we all have a certain amount of charity in our hearts, but when I read things like that in the paper, I can't figure that we have that many saints in Anchorage. And so if that's not the case, then there must be some other reason. Somebody's in somebody's pocket, or belongs to some pressure group, or what. So we end up with not good jokes. And I think if Mr. Chai would go over the votes of the assembly for a long period of time, he'll see that except for the city borough squabbles, on other matters, you can't say that there's a sectional. It just really isn't there. And so I would be very afraid of slipping back into this situation where the best people are going to do the ruling around here, because I think in over 20 years that I've observed the situation here, the so-called best people have brought us to this state of affairs today, which is you might say, a real swindling, thieving morass. It's terrible that Alaskans in the 20th century have to go through what they have to go through to get something out of their government. And this is not only the city governments, the borough government, the state government. We've got problems, and let's not make them, let's try and make them better, let's not try to make them worse.
Are there any questions of Mr. Harless?
Mr. Chairman, Joe and I have been on the different side many times, but I'm very appreciative of your comments. And I think there is a question of semantics when you talk about home rule. By the very fact, as I understand, and maybe the attorney could comment, that we are creating a charter. We are home rule. But of course, we can write that in any way. I'm wondering if we were to restrict the extension of powers to a vote of the people, and to consider the single-member districts, or a method that you would approve on apportionment. Could you support a unified government, or are there other things that you feel would have to be in there before you could say bring together these governments and do away with at least one?
I only brought these two points to you this evening because they've been very pertinent points to me the last 20 years. But there are definitely many more things that got to be ironed out, and ironed out on an equitable basis before I'm going to buy that thing.
Would you, and I think I could speak for the others, make those things known to us? That's the big thing. We're here to write a charter that's acceptable. What does it have to be acceptable? Or is it impossible? If it's impossible, then I don't think the input is going to make any, perhaps that much difference. But I'd like to see those things you feel are necessary, because you have been on the government scene for a long time.
Could you do it in writing, Joe?
I don't want to go into it tonight.
Briefly.
because it'd be long.
Yeah, well, no, that's what I meant,
right.
that you could make it available to us. I didn't mean at this time, but, I'd like to see
I could
this.
either do that or wait till I see your first draft.
Well, it can be in a somewhat of a negative way. If we had it now, it's a positive way. Right?
Deal.
Okay?
Mr. Chairman,
Ms. Froney?
Joe, I think that one day next week we're asking to have lunch with the Assembly and have the input from them. Why don't you just list items that you'd like to mention then as being necessary in the charter? Would you please?
Well, I doubt if I'll be there, because you see Mr. Asplund started out the borough having a lot of new meetings. And the westward is a hell of a lot richer because of those borough meetings. And I suppose those expenditures for years and years and years didn't get a damn bit of support.
Mr. Graham, as far as we're concerned, we're brown bagging an AMU boardroom between 12 and 1:30.
You didn't give us any money, so.
Ms. Parker?
Mr. Graham, do you think the local government here is corrupt? To some degree?
You have doubts about that point. Alaska Housing Authority is only the tip of the iceberg. Only the tip of the iceberg.
Do you think that with possibly the new charter that this might change in some way and wash some of this out?
Yes, if you make a charter that goes back to the feature of representative government instead of writing a charter that eliminates most of the people's ability to run for public office. That's the situation we've had here for years.
Mr. Chai?
Joe, what are your thoughts about a mayor? How do you see that?
I think for a long time I was for the elected mayor. I mellowed somewhat on that, but I still think we should stick to that. I try to get rid of his veto though. I think that's been very destructive. In other words, he measures us, gives us the knife.
Yeah. Okay.
Other questions? Mr. Fisher?
Graham, I think Ms. Parker asked you if you thought that local government was corrupt, and you said something effective or you doubt about it, and then mentioned the Alaska State Housing Authority, which really doesn't have anything to do with local government. By corrupt, I would...
May I interrupt you? Nothing, those are allegations at the moment, and I think the Commissioner of Commerce was careful to say that.
excuse me.
Yeah.
No, that's not local government.
Thank you, Mr.
That's state government.
Joseph.
But I'm serious about that because, frankly, if anybody knows, you're going to know because you've been around longer than anybody else, Joe, in terms of how long you've served on the Assembly. Let's face it. And I wouldn't by corrupt. I think of somebody on the take. Is that what you think of?
That's part of it, sure.
Okay. Do you think there's anybody on the take in the local government here?
Well,
Mr. Chairman,
Their philosophy is awful bent out of shape.
Okay, well, that really bothers me because I just...
I just was going to question whether it would be germane to pursue that. Not that I object to Mr. Graham's having raised it in the way that he did, but I think we could thrash out ad hominem discussions as to who's right and who's wrong in individual cases when we're trying to break ground here for something better.
You're trying to eliminate the past, Parsons, provide for the future.
Well, Mr. Parsons?
Joe, your introductory statement that it should have a strong justice and equity aspect of it, I hear that, and I'd like to hear how much more specific you think there should be things written in that would guarantee that, and that's the general area that I think of which we're talking.
Well, I want to emphasize those 2 points that deal where I think justice and equity are derived from. But then I want your whole document strong in that respect.
Are there other questions of Mr. Graham? Thank you very much for being here.
Bring your sandwich and come to
Now
lunch.
that I hear you change it.
But we don't pay you.
The lady in green there, and then Mr. Wells, and then there's the lady in yellow over here.
Is this the cockapoo kid coming in? Is that right? You done good, Jane.
We're only a few diehards left. You waited around.
My name is Kathy Allen, and I'm a researcher at the Alaska Public Interest Research Group. I'd like to look at the chance of a new charter as a new chance of a government, a new government, not necessarily the city government or the borough government or the one that your polls can show is the most popular. I see it as a chance to get to talk to the best of both and then some, hopefully, something that the local people would have a little bit more of a stronger voice in. I see that most of the people who are calling our office are basically frustrated with government in general, and I don't think the consolidating of any government is going to make them feel less confused on the outside. I think that most of the problems local people feel, at least the ones that come to our attention, if they really have enough feeling about the office to pick up the phone and call, are those that deal with the administrative functions. And although the ones that get the most publicity are the ones that the assembly or the council may make, the individual person, the consumer, finds that it's the sewer problems or it's the phone problems or it's an individual problem that probably has a quicker answer in the administration form than it does in any sort of judicial form or in any form of council or assembly. And from that point of view, I think it's very important to have an elected executive form of government where the buck has to stop, as opposed to a manager form where he is or she is very subject to input, his own machinations or her own machinations. I also think it's very important that there's a lot of accountability. And from that point of view, for a long time I always debated, and we used to have very strong discussions whether or not it was important to have single-member districts or multi-member districts. I think that I finally come to the conclusion, and it was a hard one, the single-member districts probably give the individual resident a chance that there is someone that in his or her neighborhood they can go to talk about these problems. And from that point of view, I'd like to see these single-member districts. I'd like to see as much local control as possible, and I say that because I've worked with people now in the Napa Valley area, in the South Addition, and also people in the Sand Lake area, and I see that they've had a lot of good things to say about having some control and some say in decisions that are being made on their own community level. I think once you give people a chance to help solve their community problems, I think that they like the first step into government. I think by that they're more interested in what's going on in their own government structure. I'd like to say that I wholeheartedly support the ombudsman concept, and I have to tell you why, and that is our office is now referring several calls to the ombudsman office, and they're probably the only place that we can go, we know we can go, we can get an answer. And I think that we've had several people who have called us back to say that they really feel someone's going to look out for them. It's almost as if the borough government is admitting that it may have some faults within itself, and it's sort of a human characteristic that I think that the individual residents identify with. And they say, well, you know, there is somebody in the borough who's going to say, yeah, this guy over in the sewer department just doesn't know my problem. And this person in the ombudsman office has at least been helpful to the people that we've sent down there. The last thing that I would like to recommend is
probably not going to be the most popular, and that is some sort of a disclosure of the individual members of the planning and zoning commissions, as well as department heads within this new government that we're going to be forming. And I think that Joe Graham and Lisa and even Mr. Fisher have made some mention of corruptness in government. Well, I think I can speak from a point of view of talking to individual citizens who are convinced that their government officials are corrupt. And I think that the things that are bringing to our attention are that, well, you don't know what this guy has got with this person, and this guy is only saying this because he's got this interrelationship. And it's amazing what these people will really use to convince themselves that all government is corrupt. And I think a lot of this could be attributed to some of the Watergate aftermath, perhaps. But a lot of this is a small town, and they know a lot of what's gone on. I think they have some degree of that. So from that point of view, I would like to see disclosure of department heads, sources of income, as well as the planning and zoning commissioners. I think that it probably is going to be a popular idea for most governmental offices in the future. That's about all I have to say.
Mr. Fisher?
Mr. Josephson called me down a little bit about this corruptness, but perhaps I'm naive about this. I've been around the community a long time. I think I know the inner workings of who's doing what. And, I don't believe that to be true. I'm making that statement because I'm not trying to make an argument. But if I'm coming from some place that's that naive, then I'm going to personally be sure that I do everything I can to write more protections into the charter and make it a great deal more protective than I would if, from my experience, there hasn't been the corruptness in local government. I think it's very pertinent to the point. And that's why I was very interested in your comments. You think there has been that sort of
Josephson?
I yield to Mr. Parker who wants to speak now.
Mr. Parker?
Kathy, I'm wondering, because of the disclosure that's in effect right now, it kind of, whatever the person wants to put down, it's up to them. And somebody doesn't necessarily have to disclose where his income and stuff like that is coming from. If he doesn't get caught, then he's lucky. How do you think you can put restrictions on that?
State or borough? What are you talking about?
I'm talking about borough.
Oh, the borough.
With charter and with the assembly, they file their conflict of interest reports, and they don't necessarily have to, they put down what they feel like. They can leave out something, they can get away with it.
I think offhand right now, I would say as an individual that I'd like to see a beefing up of the entire Board of Ethics, their authority, their the kind of things that they can do, and the kind of things that they're mandated to do, as opposed to just allowing your officials to file reports, that there be a check on them to see that they're actually accurate. They might have forgotten a source of income that could figure very prominently in decisions.
Mr. Chairman, as one of the first authors in the legislature of disclosure legislation, I have no problem with doing it at the local level, and incidentally, it's probably going to be done for us by the legislature. But I think, well, I'm not sure of that. But I think that these comments tonight indicate one of the bad effects of disclosure legislation, and that is that instead of addressing issues and principles and public policy on its own merits, the easier way for many citizens is to say, rather than doing the homework on the issue, so-and-so is against me because he has such and such a friendship with so-and-so who has such and such an interest. And I think that's a very destructive thing. And I confess that I participated as a legislator in helping bring that about. But I only mention this that I think all of us as citizens have to use great restraint in the inferences that we draw. Because I think one of the principles that we have acted on it and that makes the country work is the principle of civility in debate, and the principle that we do not, unless there is overwhelming and irrefutable evidence, deal with one another upon the basis that we impute evil intent, because that is a tempting and easy thing to do and much harder than addressing the issue. And I just raise that, Mr. Chairman, because I think that is a concern that, especially in local government, that can get out of hand.
Well, I would just answer that by saying that your point is well taken. However, I think that the better good is served by the disclosure being out. And I think that not only the people that don't do their homework, but I think the general public, as a rule, has a right to know what the interests are of the people that are making, especially their administrative decisions.
Mr. Gillespie?
Yes, Kathy, one of the things that you brought up regarding bringing it closer to the people, are you favoring, say, a mini-government approach as opposed to, say, the opportunity for a community council, such as we have an ordinance for it, that would allow for all ordinances to come to the local level and to give input in that type of, it's a non-structured way?
I like the community council.
Okay,
I think it's a very strong approach.
Fine.
The places that I've seen it work, it's been amazing. People really do have strong ideas about everything.
Right, there seems to be a
Bus
great
stop
deal
could be-
of interest in the community for that. Thank you.
Any other questions? I think the next one was Mr. Wells.
What was the
Yes, good evening. I'm Les Wells, Director of Curriculum with School District, and one of the candidates for this body, and I think you have a very strong and fine body. Sorry at all that I was beaten. Of course, didn't know these fine, strong, outstanding people all going to run when I did. But nevertheless, you've got a big job ahead of you and a lot of time. What I've read and heard and talking to some of you, I think you're on the right track. I think my remarks will be brief because I like to second what Chief Bennett said. I thought he delivered a very fine set of guidelines and did it well, so I won't take much of your time. I recall that I wrote down the word KISS on some materials that I used at one or two meetings I didn't get to. I was out of town during most of the part of the campaign. But that was for my own reminder to keep it simple, stupid. And I think though, and I mean it in a very complimentary way, that most of you people want to have a simple, good structured document without a lot of things that are the purview of the legislature that you would be forming. And I think this is well intended. I have some strong feelings, but at the same time, most of my strong feelings will not impede me from working and voting for this charter, because I think we need this new form of government in the worst way. And so you can win some and lose some. I do believe in the manager form of government, although I can live with the mayor form. Strong mayor, if that's the way that you people see, that's where the vote is. Because I don't think it's an issue that you should let drag you down into a lot of controversy. And I see what the people will buy in that form, and I think we can live well in our community with any of that form. I do like the mayor as a part of the legislative body, and if that could come about, but I recall the draw vote and went the other way. So I think your job is to put this together and then really sense the feel of the voters, because I wasn't as happy as I thought I would be with the vote of the, 62% outside the city and about 63% inside the city for
wasn't as strong as I hoped.
Wasn't it higher than that?
More than
Yeah, I
that.
thought
Was it a little bit more than that?
70-30-ish, wasn't it?
Was it, you could have 70 to it.
Well, it was 2 to 1.
2 to 1, 2 to 1, that's right.
Oh.
And, but I know, one of my friends lost money, Keller lost money because he thought the borough would vote more strongly for it than the city would.
Right.
But the city should beat it on it. But nevertheless, with all the things that different people are going to find wrong with it, regardless of what you do with this document, it's going to be close. Okay, single multiple districts. What will, I think either one can work, will work. I prefer the multiple. I don't like too close to the ward system with a single, but I can live with it. It has worked, it can work. I like the idea of a community in a multiple district rather than split up a community area. But again, I think the most important, what will the people vote for? Because I think the total concept is still, again, the most important. Ombudsman, sure, fine, but don't, if it's not going to really win votes for the charter, why don't you provide so that the legislative body can enact one? Put it in if it's going to really win your votes, but and I say you win the cause vote. So the necessary basic government structure only. I like what I heard your attorney saying. Is concepts into all these things. Transition provisions, I think, are the toughy ones to sell to both the governmental bodies and the people who are working in both governmental bodies. I think you need to work with them closely so the people who work for the government bodies understand it, because they can influence a lot of votes. And they've got to understand it. You've got to alleviate their fears. And I know you can't all listen to the Chief Bennett. But that's a tough provision. Service districts, of course. Community council, very good. Of course, I'm of the education. Some of you will recall I worked against the first charter and I worked for the second charter. I think we can live with what is in the charter as presented last time. I think any less than that couldn't fly. You can't give an elected body responsibility without some authority, and they've got little enough authority in the end analysis as it stands now. I think I don't think you can sell it with any less, and I don't think you can sell it with any more. Personally, I'd like to see the school board have more power, but more authority for the final action. But I know the problem, so I think you're about in the ballpark of going to sell that part of it the best. But quit.
Are there any questions of Mr. Wells?
Mr. Chairman? Les, I don't know if it's fair to ask you, one of the things that I think we could really get slack on that was in the last charter called for designated seats for election of the school board. Would you care to comment on that?
I don't think the designated seats is going to...
It was at large, but designated seats.
I think that's good. I personally like the multiple district with designated seats. And I don't think they have that much trouble. They're designated now, right?
No.
The assembly is.
No. They're strictly at large. I know to my knowledge, the ABA would object, or just in some indication I've had. Maybe that's just certain members, but I wonder. You feel that's good?
I'll check it out. Get a sounding on it.
Could you do that? I think that's going to be an important issue. Right now, it's at large, and it is
Check it out. Try to get a broad meeting.
Mrs. Holmes?
Les, how would you feel about not only designated seats, but districts for school board.
I think you, let's face it, we've had a hole in education now, a whole borough school district. Let's keep it that way. You see, we've had it in education. We know what it means. We think it's time that our governments get there. You know, our other parts of the need of the social services we all provide for people. But I think districts, I think you really run into flack on that one.
You don't see that there's a significant difference in education between, say, the Rabbit Creek area and the downtown area that would give a benefit?
I really don't.
Is there a difference between the Fairview area and the Inland area?
Well, there's a difference among the clientele, but not the, and the kind of the services you deliver in education. Now, how and what stress you put on it. And I think the school district is notably doing that. But I think to get to, we start trading off then. Are there other questions of Mr. Wells? Thank you very much for being here. I appreciate it very much. The lady in yellow over here, I think, has been holding her hand up quite a little bit.
President-elect.
Mrs. Stark?
Big winner vote. Oh, yeah? Yeah.
Sandy Stark, it's Big Women Voters. I'm going to try to give you some viewpoints, not so much just of myself initially, but some things that we women and some men also have developed through the last few years. And because of this, they will tend to be somewhat more general than some of the comments of the speakers tonight. But first of all, I just would like to, even though it's several weeks since you have been elected, congratulate all of you lucky ones who get to go to these meetings. And also, I would like to extend an offer as much as we are able to in the league to assist you in this very important work that you're doing. And we really hope that the third time is going to be a charm on unification now. And as long ago as May of 1970, the league members set some criteria that I think you would be interested in as to what should be in a charter. And although things have changed drastically since then, many of the ideas are very valid today. And number one, it should provide a framework for government that is clear and concise. And the framework is only a basic outline, similar to the Constitution. And details of the implementation can await action by the legislative body. If we burden the charter with matters that are better set by ordinance. The second point, way back when, there's a need for a strong executive. And this is very interesting. Prior to the election, which originally established the borough of Anchorage, the Anchorage League supported the manager form of government as a means to give professional expertise. This time, as an alternative, there was support for funds to hire a qualified administrative assistant for the chairman, who is now, of course, the mayor. Now, a growing number of urban counties nationwide have expanded this opinion. This option provides for both professional capability and political accountability. An elected executive is coupled with authority to hire a professional administrator whose title varies from everything from chief administrative officer or administrative assistant to staff director. Now the situation today is a little different. There is not consistent agreement among league members that the manager system is preferable. The one thing I have picked up agreement on, and this is as recent as this last week, is that there are two goals, and one is to maintain public control and accountability alongside and equal to that proficient expertise. Both are very important. Other points that were important to have in a charter that still stand today, that have held up through the last few years, regards services and taxes. There was a consensus in 1970 that services should be administered and taxed area-wide when they benefit the entire area, with provision made via the surface area concept for differential services and taxation. The bonded indebtedness for those facilities that benefit an entire area should be spread, for instance, such as for the port. Now, as to the relationship between the elected school board and the elected legislative body, this was more of a controversy last time than now, but let me repeat again that this should be clearly defined. While a line item veto is undesirable and political suicide according to the budget, hopefully this assembly or the newly elected one will work to end the present game playing that's hot potato handling of the school budget. The relationship and duties of appointed boards and commissions should also be defined, but as simply and concisely as possible. In 1970, their suggestion for representation of your legislative body was this: have an 11-member legislative body, 8 elected from districts, and 3 at large. Remember that this was made back at the time when dual representation of city council members had yet to be challenged and eliminated. Now, by August 73, there had been a slight shift. The agreement about reapportionment had dissolved, and following extensive research and debate, consensus was weighted slightly towards elected single-member districts. While many still share this preference, there is some satisfaction with the present compromise districting, almost as if it's a relief, as well as for a combination such as 8 elected from districts or 3 at large. Now, the main thing, though, is that members feel that unification's time has come. We'd like to have us learn from the mistakes of the past and try to avoid this divisiveness and lack of accountability to competing local governments when they are in the same area. And we feel that by offering the public a very concise, very clean document that isn't muddied by legislative details, the people in our area are going to have a chance to build their government the way they want it. And that's my brief statement.
Thank you,
Where the
Mrs.
majority
Stark.
of the members are at this point.
Are there questions? Jane?
Sandy, you said that services that benefit the entire community should be area-wide, and you gave the example of the port. I was wondering if you'd care to draw the line on what some of those other services are, and do you think that the charter should address itself to something like area-wide police power when the people haven't had a chance to vote on it yet?
All right, first of all, speaking for the league as a whole, no, I really can't say, because we haven't addressed that issue recently. And I think this is one of the things where, one thing that comes across is that you keep in mind that people want to vote on something which is going to be a major departure. And I think you have certain, basic premises, and on the basis of those, then you can decide on these votes. I think it would be a mistake if we start to chance and put into the charter things which is very questionable. It would be questionable in the public's mind as to whether they are area-wide or not, unless they have a chance to vote on it.
Okay, well, in the area of assets and liability or debts, if we made the asset of the port area-wide, and what do we do with the deficit for the funds that took to build that port? Those go area-wide also?
Oh, when you're working out your transition thing, and I would assume that there will be some technical help here, you try to arrive at what's going to be a just solution where you're distributing the assets as well as the debts. I think talking as Charter Commission with those who were knowledgeable in the juvenile situation, and going back to some of the consultants in the area were very helpful here. Because what you're trying to do is to do what is fair, but to try to do it by not so much strictly political decisions, but by some sound financial judgments of what is good in the bond field and what can be done. And so try to work it out in this manner. One of the things that is interesting is one of the previous members of the assembly in Juneau was sort of looking philosophically back at this very issue. And it was a very hot controversy at the time. And particularly in regards to the airport, which is a municipal function. And it was very interesting because her viewpoint after a few years was that there tended to be a leveling out. And each area is, of course, very conscious when you go in of what they've paid in. And they want to make sure that the other areas pay their fair share. But because of the nature of the way this goes when you get a representative government and you move this thing through, that as several years have gone by, she feels that this is really equalized. And if there were any slight injustices, in the first few years or so, that this has been more cleaned up. For instance, like those that are paying for sewers in one area at one time, pretty soon the shoe was on the other foot and the other areas being gone back.
Are there other questions? Mrs. Serwood?
If I might, as president-elect of the League, I hope, Sandy, that we can look to League for going to need a great deal of assistance on the selling and public information on the charter. And we do have a very tight timetable, would hope to come to the voters in August, and it's going to need a lot of help. I hope that even though League tries to get away a bit in the summer, that there can be support there. I would also hope that because of their background in both, particularly in your school for many years and in planning, that you could take a specific look at say that first draft, or give input to that and comments on it, those two areas.
Are there other questions of Ms. Stark? Thank you very much for being here. Gentleman in brown.
Before I get going, I have testimony here from Susan Ruddy, who wanted to testify in fear over 3 pages worth of
What was the name?
Susan Ruddy.
Susan Ruddy.
And would you like me to hand it to you, or
If you give it to Evie Walters, secretary.
My name's Larry Makinson. Let me preface my remarks. I've been in Anchorage only 2.5 years, but they've been in intensive 2.5 years. As far as local government, I worked for 6 months with Anchorage Times Governing Bureau, and I've been information officer in the borough since the past 2 years. One of the things that was brought out here, and when I came here, by the way, you have to pardon me, I wanted to talk, I didn't know exactly what I wanted to say, and I just kind of tried to put together some notes as I've listened to everyone else, and they're all over this page, so it's going to be a little difficult, but bear with it. Judy Whitson answered a question that was asked before. I think someone asked her the question of something to the effect of, did she feel herself that she was interested in the charter, did she want to see the unified government as? And her answer was that she didn't really care about a unified government so much as she wanted a better government. And I think you've got to look at that as being the general position of the voting and tax-paying public in Anchorage. Most people are interested in the best government they can get, not necessarily a unified government. I'd like to talk briefly now what I think the best government is, and what I have a feeling a lot of other people think it's going. I think it is too. With the city and the borough, the structure we have now, there is a natural built-in conflict. Now, much as this conflict has in the past been costly and has often been counterproductive, it at least gives the voters and the taxpayers the feeling that neither government is really going to get away with anything as long as the other government is around to keep it in check. I think that's a very important concept and something that ought not to be forgotten. With a unified government, you lose that. And I think with unification, again going back to what Judy Whitson was talking about, you're really creating a governmental monopoly. And you shouldn't allow a monopoly to operate without extra safeguards that aren't necessarily needed if you have two competing governments. I think you need checks and balances in this new government wherever possible. And I think this idea of a monopoly is going to be the biggest question that's going to face that people are really going to think about when they go into the polls. You know, in the past, although I wasn't here for the last two charter elections, this really wasn't the same community. There were a lot more rural people, or people who felt they were rural. I don't think anyone denies that this is a very urban area now. There's just a different flavor to the whole area that I've seen just in the short time that I've been here. And I think the main question is not going to be whether we're being forced into a more urban government. It's going to be whether we're forced into a bigger government that we have less control over. So for this reason, I think the charter should reflect checks and balances wherever possible. I personally think you need an independent executive and an independent legislative body. I think two forces rubbing against the grain of each other are very healthy. And I think that's the way a strong mayor elected executive system functions. I don't think we should build into the government structure any setup without a healthy degree of conflict. And I think that's especially true in a very growing community like Anchorage. And there was a thing that was brought in here by someone else about the council manager form of government being sort of caretaker government. And I think that's very true. In a growing community like Anchorage, I think there's a real need for one person to be elected to give direction to the community. Someone to have a platform that a person can vote on. And you can't vote on a manager. And a manager is restricted, therefore, in the direction he can lend to the government. You have at best a splintered leadership because you've got several, a group of body of people who are leading the government. There's no one person. I think it adds something for a person to be able to go into a voting booth and cast a ballot for one person who he feels represents the direction he wants to see the community go in. I think it's a very valuable form of government. I think it's also valuable to have a professional manager running the day-to-day affairs of the government. And I think that does exist even with a strong mayor form of government. And it should be, I think the way would be some sort of a, more or less like the borough has now with a staff director or a chief administrative officer who's confirmed by the assembly and nominated by the mayor. I think it's just as valuable to have civilian control of the military. I think it's very valuable, however, to have one person to run the day-to-day government and another person to guide the overall direction that the government's going in. An administrator is not the same thing as a leader. He's got a very definite job, but it's not the same thing. If you only have an administrator and you don't have a leader, especially when we've got a continually fluctuating situation, I think you lose something. Okay, in short, I think we need the cleanest government we can get. I think that means the one with the most checks and balances. And I think the one with the most checks and balances is one with an independent elected mayor with veto authority and an independent elected legislative body that votes by itself and without having a mayor in their midst. And I have a PS. Single-member districts, I think, are good in terms of making the office available for people who have limited means, and also, of course, the most your best chance of knowing your own representative. On the other hand, multi-member districts are very good in that they allow people within a given district to vote every single year and to vent their spleen if they feel there's something that is bothering them. And I think that's very valuable. And my own feeling on that is I sort of like the idea of single-member districts, and I don't see any evils yet that have happened on the Assembly as a result of having multi-member districts. I think it takes a little time to see, but it looks fine to me so far. I have another PPS. If you hold the election in August, which is what I understand you're planning to do, you've just got to expect a very weak voter turnout. And I think that your results that you get from your public opinion polls should be tempered with this understanding. I have a feeling that the scientific polls that you'll be really conducting are valid if you have a good voter turnout. I have sincere doubts that they're valid if you don't have a good voter turnout. And to give you some idea of what you might expect, I would very strongly suggest that you take a mail-out poll. Some sort of a poll that, granted, is not scientifically based, but one that's based on a necessary response by the people that get the poll to send it back to you. I think you're going to, in that way, get a better indication of the hardcore voters who are going to be turning out and voting, how they feel on it. And I think it'd be very valuable to compare the results of one poll with the other. This brings back to thoughts we had of a survey that was done in late 1973 that indicated that area-wide police would be approved 3-1. It was a scientific poll, and granted there were a lot of things that took place between that poll, but I think you really should look at very carefully at the. I think you need a participatory poll in addition to your.
Are there any questions, Mr. Parsons?
I think I hear you saying that a mail-out poll would correlate with the people who usually vote.
I think, if I were doing it, I'd have a mail-out poll to registered voters. You're going to get a very poor turnout, but you don't necessarily, and you're going to get a reasonably poor return. But for example, in Lane County, Oregon, they did a poll on government services, and they played it up. They said they were going to send it out. They mailed out 3,000. They got 28% return, which is really excellent. And I think on a subject of such wide interest as unification, you get that same sort of results. And of course, the timing for it, I would imagine, would be right after you've completed your charter, and before or during the process of public hearings.
Your feeling then is that the mail-out poll will reach the people that are interested enough to reply, and that they will be a better representative group of the possible voters.
Yeah, and I think another thing, if you have a significant difference in the results you get between your interview polls and your mail-out polls, you ought to think very seriously about not holding the election in August, but holding it in October.
Ms. Parker, Mrs. Holmes?
To follow up on this, Larry, what would you think of not a mail-out, because that's expensive and has problems in itself, but newspaper poll, which might be in the paper along with the sample draft of the charter to be clipped and mailed back? Is that?
Yeah, I think that's, well, okay. One assumption you've got to make is that every voter is not going to read that charter. So putting it in the newspaper with the poll may or may not be that wise. As far as the newspaper poll, I thought, of course, that's also an alternative. I don't see I can't think in my own head why that would be any worse than a mail poll, except for the fact that you're getting people who read the newspaper, not people who have voted in the last election. You can be more selective with a mail-out poll.
Oh, you would not mail a general mailing to every registered voter?
Just to the registered voters.
I mean,
take the just what they did in Lane County, for example. They have 125,000 some voters. They mailed out 3,000 of these things. just selected at random.
Random sample.
Registered voters. I think you get a certain core group there, the ones who respond to that are really going to be a really pretty good idea of what the vote is going to be like with a light turnout.
Parsons.
We do have a question on the thing whether they voted in the, that they are registered voters and the like, and that I suspect that there's some evidence that people say yes, they have when they haven't, so that you can't always be sure of that kind of
That's the experience I've had. Just, I'm not a poll taker or anything, but just the people I've talked to who've taken polls, there's an amazing number of people
who say they're good citizens when they really don't assume all the responsibilities when the day is there.
That's easily covered though by going to the registration if you wish to.
By the number of people who spoke to me, I should have had double the votes I got. After the election.
That's very scientific.
Are there other questions, Ms. Mackinson? Evie?
I'm very curious and a very naive point. Considering that the Leisure Time survey just recently completed says that only 1 in 5 people actually funnel up here for summer recreation out of the borough mold on a regular basis, what do you predict the small turnout?
Well, we had a small turnout in February. I don't think, from things like attendance at meetings,
It really doesn't have anything to do with the weather.
No, I think it very definitely has a lot of things to do with it. I don't care what you say about what the poll says about how many people leave Anchorage. Bus ridership is down in the summertime. Attendance at meetings is down in the summertime. Everything in Anchorage is down in the summertime, I think. And I think that an October election is going to get a lot more voters out than August election.
Statistically, you have statistics in favor of it.
Do you think this creates certain special problems in terms of transition, having it in October?
Well, it does, yeah. But I think that we've had an election in February here. Although the turnout wasn't that great, it was. There's so many elections. There have been too many elections, though. I'm losing the figures. But recently, we had one election that had a lot more people turning out than they thought there was going to be. The October elections and the February election.
Mr. Holmes?
Larry, what do you do if you have your charter election in October and you also have an election for the borough mayor, I believe, this October?
Yeah, it was difficult.
That's a big problem.
Mr. Chairman, on that, Mrs. Holmes, because one that I've thought of many times, have we actually gotten an opinion from the attorney or someone else as to whether is there a process that could be followed, and you'd probably have to go through the two legislative bodies. Say, could a request be made of the court, for instance? I think it has to go to the court, that you would set off, say, your election of municipal offices to November and allow, in other words, hold a regular municipal election at that time. Are there possibilities?
Well, that's what happened, I don't know.
Well, no, but that was a special thing and decreed by the courts.
I think that would take some research perhaps by our attorney, unless you have to have it.
I think it's a real possibility. The statute says that the election is the first Tuesday of October or at a date provided by ordinance. A certain amount of flexibility in the assembly as of now to change the date of regular elections. Plus, I assume that if the charter itself, if the charter election were held, say, the 1st of August, and within the charter, say in the transition provisions, an item was included that the next regular election, that is the election for officers under the charter, would be a month later, that would be as valid as any other part of the charter, assuming that it all passed in early October. Well, there are several possibilities here.
I'm not sure what all that gained. It still means that voters would go to the poll twice, and there would have to be a special election at an unusual time for a local election. What you would gain, in your judgment, would be the avoidance of an August summertime.
I think what you gain is having more voters come to the polls. I think the more voters go to the polls on an issue, the better your chance it's going to pass.
Yeah.
That's what you're interested in. And you're worried about it. October is the time to do it.
Are there other questions of Mr. Meyer? Jane?
Would you read Susan's testimony? Is it just one page?
About 3 pages.
It's about 3 pages.
Are there,
We better.
are there copies for each commission?
No, it's just one copy.
Or
She could run them off.
I can remember.
I didn't think
Here's a copy.
she's going to.
Thank you, Mr. Mack. I think Carl, who's been, did you wish to
I've got that.
talk? Thank you.
Here, you want one not
Here we
tonight.
I spoke before to you, I'm Carl Peters, 4739 Denali. I spoke before to you when I wasn't ready, and I'm not much better now, but I attended 3 meetings purposely to try to figure out what the difference was between the rural vote, the city vote, and what is more or less the suburb vote, what the people are thinking of. And I've heard some very good information of it, and I'll pass my opinion along for what it's worth. That if you people try to get this charter out as early as you think you're going to do, I don't think you're going to have the information that you need for it. My suggestion is that get together with the city and with the borough, with their department heads, from the little to the big, and ask if they won't coordinate and get some kind of a little plan run up between each comparable department, between the city and the borough, as to what they're going to save, what the additional cost is going to be. In other words, an input from each department, finding out how they're going to blend. Because when it's all said and done, the only reason that we want to get a unified government is either to get a better government or a cheaper government. Now, I don't really think it'll be a better government. It possibly would be a little cheaper. Like has been mentioned before in here, the competition between the city and the borough keeps both organizations pretty well on their toes. And for that same reason, I am for a strong mayor form if we do move to that. Because you've lost the competition between the city and the borough. We do go into unification. But you've still got the same competition going between your strong mayor and the assembly or the council, whichever it is. It can't hardly get as one-sided as it can. Is that if you're using the council or assembly and a city manager, because the city manager's got to do what the council says if he gets fired. That's purely and simply it. Now, as Mary and several of them spoke up here about the possibilities of the assembly or the council, whatever it was, for having a side staff for information. They are badly in need of it, very badly in need of it. But you're talking about not one person
careful enough to be able to get the information they need. And I should think that they should be a provision made where they could take anyone out of the borough or the city government when they're united and have them assigned to them for a matter of time to give them information. So that way they can pick somebody out of the department that they're in that knows his way around there or her way around there, and they can get more precise information than they can in any other way. In other words, they have to have the authority to do it. In other words, the assembly says, I want John Doe here for a month, 2 weeks, or whatever it is. And who pays for him, I don't know. But he is under the orders of the assembly for what information he has or what he can dig out, or she can dig out, whichever it is. Now that seems to be a little odd approach for a borough employee to be taking, but I think it's fine.
Are there any questions, Mr. Peter? Thank you very much for being here. You ask, and then Mrs. Eisenson after.
I don't know, I think I know everybody, but I'm Harriet Booth, and I only want to say that after sitting in on all this hearing, that I will take a lot of what I've heard tonight back to the Anchorage branch of the American Association of University Women. I am the legislative chairman, and I heard Arliss's plea to the person that represented the League of Women Voters that you will need help in getting the word out. And I intend to do this kind of thing with the organization since this is the first such meeting of yours that I have attended. And should we have some consensus of opinion at our next meeting, or I'll see that we get some, then I would like to come before you again and give that information. That's great.
We would like to have you give Evie Walters at our office a call then, so that you can be heard early on the agenda and we can schedule you.
Mr. Chairman, might point out, I'm familiar with how AUW operates, and they do have sessions where they really attempt to inform. I'm just wondering if Harriet might like us to provide, someone to talk to them. It might not be a bad idea at some point along the line.
I think that would be very good. I'll get in touch with your Evie Walters over here because we do have a program chairman.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Harriet? I know. Bev? Take her name and add it to yours.
I feel like a diaper about to go off the high board for the first time because I've never testified to it before. But there are a couple of things that bother me about the last charter that I supported very strongly, and I thought this would be an appropriate time to bring them up. The first deals with vacancies and forfeiture of office of assembly members. This is the first public meeting I have been to in years at which all the members of the body have been present for at least part of the meeting. Like many of you, I serve on boards, and it's awfully frustrating to come and not have a quorum. And like many of you, I've gone to lots of public meetings which have been called off because there wasn't a quorum. The last charter dealt with the provisions through which an assembly member might be removed from office, and one of them was if that member failed to attend 3 consecutive regular meetings of the assembly without being excused by formal action of the assembly. earlier this year, the Borough Assembly was unable to have meetings because they could not get a quorum for several weeks. And even if they were absences which were excused, I felt it was very irresponsible on the part of those Assembly people. When they were elected, they all knew that they were to be there to do public business. This provision, which calls for failure to attend 3 consecutive regular meetings, gets at only part of the problem, because it is possible to come to every other meeting to not represent your people and still, in effect, not violate any law regarding attendance. I don't necessarily feel that being there makes an Assembly representative a good representative. It's possible that someone might come half the time and do more good than another person coming all the time, but I think that if you address yourself to this problem, some people may not run because they will admit to themselves that they're really not going to be there all the time. They're going to have other business that they will consider more important. And I think if those people who run are only those people who are sincerely dedicated to serving all the time, that the electors will get better representation. Now, one of my assemblymen was among those people who was not at many of those meetings last winter. He was one of those who testified tonight, and it just irritated me to listen to those allegations when that person had contributed to stopping government for a month. A second point that I want to urge you to deal with lies in that sphere of powers of the school board. The charter, the most recently written charter, reads the school board shall, insofar as consistent with municipal law, have powers and duties provided by state law, including but not limited to the following: formulation of policy for the operation of schools. It goes on dealing with personnel and boards of personnel. To that first point, formulation of policy for operation of the schools, I think needs to be readdressed. Because I think it ought to say formulation of policy for education on the elementary and secondary level, period. I don't think that the school administration should be providing janitorial service, should be clearing skating rinks, should be doing a whole lot of other things that they're doing. I'm aware that Title 29 provides that certain things must be done and certain things can be done. And I would urge you to take a look at Title 29 and only put into this charter enough to comply with those provisions of Title 29 which say that the school board must do this and must do that, and not one whit more. The night before last, at about 11:30 at night, we got woken up by some noise on the schoolyard. We live next to the Willow Crest School, and when I looked out the window, all the lights on the ice skating rink were on for the first time since November, December, whenever the power outage came. And they were clearing the rink. There were 2 trucks out there and about 4 men, and they were clearing the rink, which is going to disappear in about 10 days. And I find it a very, very aggravating form of public expenditure. I think that if those kinds of functions were combined with the Public Works Department, they would be more loath to throw around money 11:30 at night at the end of March clearing an ice skating rink. Living near the school as I do, I've seen many other examples of public funds being expended ostensibly in the name of education, but which really don't relate to education, except in a very tangential way. I and some of my neighbors have got out there and cleared the skating rink in the winter. We've done other things to try and make our school a community school. But the thing that we can't do is ensure that our children are going to get a better education when they are in the classroom. And I think if the school board and the school administration can address themselves only to education only to books and the quality of teachers and what should be taught and what shouldn't be taught, I think that we'd arrive at a much better educational system than if they have to worry about cafeterias and busing and landscaping and custodial services and all that other stuff. I know that there are at least 2,000 people in this community who feel very strongly that anything having to do with schools should be the exclusive province of the school board. But I think in view of the current hassle over what the school board and what the ABEA will determine in the schools, I think you'll find many more people willing to come forward and support the principle that the school board and the school administration should deal with education and not all the peripheral things. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Eisen. Mr. Fisher?
I appreciate the fact that you've given us specific suggestions in the school section. That vacancy problem, and I agree with your concern, I really do. As you know, we've talked about it in the past. It's really irritating. But you've not given us a suggestion there, and I wish you would. How do we deal with it more effectively than suggested there?
I think maybe one way to handle it would be that any assembly member who fails to attend 3 meetings in a year without being excused by, well, one of the problems with being excused by formal action of the assembly is that people who serve on the board tend to be very charitable. I know I've been in that position where I wanted someone to serve and I wanted them to serve well. And sometimes I had to shove them a little to get them to the realization that they really couldn't. They really had too many other obligations. We're trying one thing on the Channel 7 television board. If you miss 2 meetings, and it doesn't matter what the excuse is, you are asked to step off. Now, we've never had a situation in which there's been serious illness. The reason that we came up with the 2-meeting thing was that we were trying to get that organization going and trying to get the station on the air, and we didn't have a quorum several times. And what made it even more frustrating was that our members represent all of South Central Alaska. People were coming in from Palmer, from Kenai, from the Nilchik, and for some of them it meant half an hour on the plane and an hour and a half drive. It's all the time in between at the airport there, at the airport here. We couldn't take action. And so we came to having informal meetings with whoever we could get. And then when it came to some critical issues, those of us who were active, who were participating, were accused of railroading things through. So we took the step of saying, if you miss 2 meetings, you're out. And I think probably if someone were seriously hurt in an accident, we address ourselves to that. But
You're all heart, Bev.
well, what we've got now is a quorum every time, and we're moving ahead. And so I would suggest that you consider something like that, that only under the direst circumstances can people be excused. 3 consecutive meetings does give someone time to take a vacation, although it would sure be nice if everybody took their vacation at once and then you just recess as you do, as Congress does. Congress recesses for time in the winter and time in the summer.
In the spring and the fall.
Right now.
That's what they did without a formal recess. Everybody just left.
Mrs. Holmes?
Of course, Bev, the real difficulty, if you have 3 years to serve and you serve once a week for 3 years, to say, put a positive number and say 2 meetings a year is really an awfully, such an onerous thing that I think you might find that nobody ever ran for the office.
I wonder, though, if you wouldn't get more people running who are really determined that they're going to be there instead of some of the people who would like to be there, who like to serve, who have lots of other obligations. Maybe those people are overextended.
I'm just not sure that attendance that I would sacrifice other things just for attendance. I don't want a really dedicated soul who can't cope with the problems.
You know, we are acquainted with going to a national meeting that's concerned with municipal things and may be gone at that time and serving me well by so going and missing meetings because of it. And I'm concerned that they do take vacations too. And I hope someone can, I agree, and as Dick says, it's not satisfactory the way it's stated, and it's abused, and I'm not sure how to do it.
Meetings a year or 8 meetings a year, but this, you know, by just limiting them to 3 consecutive meetings, you know, they could come for every other one, or they could shut the whole show down, and that's what I want to avoid. It's the principle.
Mrs. Froney?
Yeah. I felt very strongly on this until I got a list from the clerk this last year as to who had been gone when. And I discovered to my surprise that one of the assembly members who was always there for critical decisions had missed the most. Never missed a critical decision. Was very careful to keep up, and if he was in Timbuktu, he was back there for the critical decision. But he had missed more assembly meetings than any other assembly, and yet he never missed a single critical. Just because Jesse and I were the only 2 that had only missed 1 or none, didn't mean that we had really served better. Now, during the time that you're speaking about, I was one of those that was away, and I at that time had the best attendance record of anybody. I also had notified them that I would be back on the exact day that I came back, and they did have a quorum on one of those days. They weren't counting on me to be there, though I had told them I would be there for that, and it was called on.
Mr. Fisher?
There's no restriction now at all with either the Assembly or the Council as to the vacancy in the office if they miss anything. So, with this provision, at least this one, I'm of the belief we'll see a vast improvement, because at least we're going to address ourselves to the problem. The only thing you can do now, because I haven't been there in a few years, we used to do is just embarrass the devil out of a guy, and finally he quit. But that's the only thing you can do. I agree with you, it's a problem, but I think this will go a long way towards solving it.
I'd like to see it beefed up a little.
Okay, but you give me the numbers. That's the problem.
Well, let me get with Mary and see what I think was your idea of there being definite vacation times, and that other than those definite vacation times, that there be a limited number that the person can miss, that then that would be good. But I will assure you that I am serving you better for having been away those 3 weeks and to have gotten a little bit farther away from the problem, just long enough to realize there were still some solutions.
Are there other questions of Ms. Eisenstein?
Mr. Chairman, when I was on the Assembly, I was appreciative when my colleagues left.
Well done. Thank you very much. Mr. Whitson?
I'm Carl Whitson. The snow clearing story that I just heard really hit home because I too was awake late last night. In this case, 2:30 in the night. And in this case, a residential apartment line street, which hadn't been cleared of snow for 2 months. And in this case, the city public works crew out there spending money, which if I had the choice, wouldn't have been spent. I don't expect the charter to address this, but it points out the kinds of things that make me dislike or distrust, or in some cases even fear government. And I won't go into my philosophy, but for the purpose of the charter, maybe that's a good place to start. I have a few specific things listed that, if included in a charter, would make me support it wholeheartedly. I'm sure there will be some things that I haven't thought of yet, and I'm sure that some of these things aren't possible to go in a charter because it's really tough knowing whatever it is that's in Title 29, what all the state laws are, and what it takes to make a functioning government. Let me get on with it. Things that I'm going to speak about, for the most part, I think are limits on government. And the area that's most dear to me is taxes. I don't know that it's possible. In fact, it probably isn't. But I would like to see taxes eliminated, possibly with a lottery situation. As I understand it, there are some states using a lottery now, and if it takes a change in the state law, perhaps somewhere down the road that can happen. And I'd like to see at least the possibility of that remaining open in the charter. Barring that, then I really have to see a limit on taxes before I can support the charter. I looked at my last year's tax bill just before I came this evening, and my mill rate was just in the neighborhood of 20 mills for last year. And half of that went to schools, which means that the other half was only 10 mills. And I keep hearing rumblings that the state is intending on funding 100% all the schools. So I would like to see us move in the direction of say about a 15 mil limit 2 or 3 years down the road. I want to see a prohibition against deficit spending in the charter. I don't think we ever need to get in the situation that the federal government is in, or that the state probably will be in. No reason for the local government to get into that position since we haven't gotten it yet. Let's stop it now. If advertising campaigns for spending measures cannot be paid for out of public funds, then I feel that spending measures are less likely to pass. And I'd like to see that limit placed on it. I think the League of Women Voters or other political groups or members of the local government as individuals properly should publicize and advertise for things that they're interested in. But tax money should not be used for that, except publishing the full total document that is coming up for vote. No advertising. I'd like to see, and I don't know if this is proper in a charter, but I'd like to see a requirement that the local government provide incentives for department heads and employees to cut expenses, to reduce costs. I don't think there are any incentives in our local government at present for reducing costs. One thing that has been suggested that seems to have a lot of merit as far as I'm concerned would be a provision that any employee who could prove to a legislative body, for instance, that his job, his particular job, was not needed, that the functioning of government or the function that he was performing could go on just as well if he stayed home, that he be retired for life with full pay, and the local government then just eliminate his office space and eliminate the office materials and so on that he had formerly been using for nothing. I would hope that something like that would be used in the transition period. I think perhaps that could allay a lot of fears of people who think that their jobs might be eliminated if they were given some severance pay that they thought would be adequate. Then they might not be reluctant to vote in favor of the charter, even though their job might be eliminated. Service areas I'm not up on. As I understand the concept, service areas should provide for different areas of taxation, different levels of taxation and different levels of service within the local government area. If that isn't right, if that can't work, I don't know what. I'm really sorry. But I guess I just leave that as a question. I really want that to happen, but from the things I've heard, it sounds like it's illegal. I'd like to see a provision that calls for an expiration date on every ordinance that's passed by the Assembly. And I don't know what the time limit would be, just to pick a number, say 10 years. So that our local government doesn't 50 years down the road get in the position that some of our eastern states are in now, of having all kinds of laws on the books that can be used discriminately for harassment, or in some cases even be contradictory to current codes or laws that are being used. For instance, if our legislature were to pass a law that prohibited me from going in the woods alone, that required me to have a partner if I go off the road, and then 4 years from now, that the legislative body who might vote on that law wouldn't pass it, then I'd like to see that come up. I'd like not for it to just lie dormant there because nobody's thinking about it, because it gets us into trouble. I'd like to repeat what Judy said, my wife said earlier, about not limiting competition by law or by license from government-provided services or businesses. I feel strongly about that too. There's enough of an edge for government services without prohibiting any competition for them. They can operate without paying taxes, and if somebody can beat the edge that a government-provided service has, and still pay taxes and all those things, then the competition should run the government service out of business. I shouldn't prohibit that possibility. I don't want to see any administrative law. I want all things that are passed, whatever they're called, that have force of law to go to the legislative body and be approved by the legislative body. Any administrator writing a rule that I have to abide by through threat of going to jail or fine that hasn't been approved by the legislature. Don Smith mentioned a point at an earlier hearing that hit home to me, and that was concern with the many times that emergency provisions are mentioned in the charter and in other ordinances. I'd like to see that not abused too. And as a suggestion, I thought of this: require a unanimous assembly approval before any agency can proceed under emergency provisions. If it's truly an emergency, then nobody's going to object. But if somebody objects, then it is an emergency and they shouldn't proceed. One last point is that I'd like to see as a limit on the amount of land that the government can own. According to the planning department figures, 29% of the land in the Anchorage Bowl area, just in the bowl, excluding military bases, is now owned by government. If you add the military and if you start adding national parks, Chugach Range and so on, I don't know what the figure comes up to. I know the borough has a land acquisition program going on now for parks, and I'm not sure if they have any other in mind or in process. But at some point, there should be a limit. The borough should not have authority under the charter to acquire 100% of the land of the borough. There's got to be some limit there somewhere. I can see a problem there because our charter can only limit the borough government, and that doesn't keep the state government or the federal government from acquiring land. Nevertheless, I would like to see it addressed some manner. Those are the points that I have written on so far.
Thank you, Mr. Whitson. Are there any questions of Mr. Whitson? Thank you very much for being... Oh, Jane?
Yeah, on the limiting the land that the government can own, I have a question about how parks would come about if the local unit of government didn't purchase land.
I'm not suggesting that we at this point try to reduce the amount of land that the government has or curtail projects which have begun or that we see as a necessity. But I'm just saying that if we continue to see needs for land acquisition, this project and then the next project and the project after that, we can end up with no private land in the borough. I'm just asking that there be a limit put on there. Pick all the land that's under current acquisition programs and add that to the 29%. And then take the land that was all the land that was acquired in that particular project and add that to it. And maybe you come up with 45 or 55%. But at some point there, then say that's enough. Protect the people.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Ronnie?
I think that other than the specific parks or school sites that are under contemplation, that the main borough land acquisition program is to try to get the proportion of state lands into borough hands that were supposedly guaranteed by the Borough Act. And
Wouldn't want to
as-
see that jeopardized.
and as is, that doesn't change the total proportion, but it does change it from state hands to borough hands. And I think that our major land acquisition in the borough is in that direction, rather than buying outright land that's in private hands. Isn't that the way you
Well,
see
you
it?
don't have any money, yeah. There aren't any other major plans
No.
currently. Of course, you continue to get land through your tax foreclosure, and I'm...
Yes.
Are there any other questions? Thank you for being here, Mr. Whitson. Is there anybody else here who wishes to be heard?
How about it, Mrs. Conley?
I'm listening.
Good girl.
I'll declare the public hearing closed. And briefly, for the members of the Charter Commission, we have just a little bit of business. I don't know of any unfinished business, except the Charter. New business. I have committee reports. Sherry Holmes, Charter Production Committee.
The Friday noon meeting will be a Friday 11 o'clock meeting tomorrow unless there's serious objection on the part of commission members.
Where?
It will be in the Lusac Library Council Chambers. We have to vacate
By one.
the chambers by 1 o'clock tomorrow, but subsequent Friday meetings will be at noon in the Lusac Library Council Chambers, and we don't have to vacate to go around.
Who's gonna
No.
be, is Beatty gonna be there?
All right.
Pardon?
Is Beatty gonna be there?
I believe Bill Beatty will be there.
Yes, Bill Beatty will be there, at least, that was the indication this afternoon. And he's going over the Charter.
This is a full meeting?
Full
Yes.
commission meeting.
I'll be there as soon as I can, but I've got to go record at 11.
We will have a report on the legal aspects similar to the subcommittee for
Now, is there,
Yes, Rumback.
Bob Baggett, are there any other commission member comments? If not, the chair will entertain a motion. Oh,
I just
Jane?
wanted to apologize to the commission for having missed the public hearing last night. I was down in the wetlands.
You didn't fly the plane yourself, did you?
No.
I'd like to make a comment and congratulate the chair or the commissioner, whoever, but I've sat through a whale of a lot of public hearings, and I think the public really feels they're being listened to, and somebody's to be congratulated
I've
for.
got glass eyes on, I close them behind.
Well, you may, but I think they've been a healthy series. What small amount I've been able to.
Chairman, I would like to add that I really feel that the quality of people that have been coming by and large is exceptional.
What's the fine? Vicki Almeida?
This will be the last commission meeting that I will be at until the next set of public hearings. I want to tell you that it's not because I don't enjoy your company, and I love you,
Hours.
but I can't stand the hours. Well, along with the other 21 boards and committees. And my pinnacle doesn't like it too much. But I'm going to keep up with this, and I would even like a copy just for my own personal use of your minutes.
They're going to
Your
be
meeting minutes.
counted as a group.
I can't, no, I can't, and I can help out anytime you like, really.
We certainly appreciate your help you've been. Mary Froney?
I think we should ask her if she has any suggestions, specifically ask her. Now, she said through these.
I'd like to think about it and maybe commit it in writing.
Good.
Right.
We would love it.
You are a voter, too.
And anyone that hasn't done their questionnaire, give it to Evie to put in the envelope and hand them all to Rowan sometime next week.
You live in Jernigan. Are you in Spenard?
No, you're in the city.
South
South of Northern Lights.
Oh, our categories.
There isn't a category, though, for us.
Yes, there is. That's
You're in a
council
subdivision.
chamber.
No, on the list at the end of the questionnaire, it has Central Business District, Inlet View, Spenard. It has no Turnigan.
I guess you're Spenard inside city. Inside subdivision.
That's the only real discrepancy that I saw.